The town crier, voice of the streets. Close your eyes now and let your breathing slow. We're going to drift back through the centuries together, to a time before smartphones and television, before radio broadcasts and printed newspapers arrived at every doorstep. We're traveling to an era when news moved at the speed of a human voice, carried through cobblestone streets by a figure both familiar and essential to daily life, the town crier, sometimes known as the bellman. Picture, if you will, a medieval town square on an ordinary morning. The sun filters through narrow streets. Merchants are setting up their stalls. And then, cutting through the ambient sounds of the day, comes the clear, trained voice of the town crier, announcing the news that everyone needs to hear. Fact 1. The core role. The town crier's fundamental purpose was beautifully simple, yet profoundly important. This was the person responsible for proclaiming royal edicts, local laws, market days, lost and found notices, and all manner of public information. In an age when most people could not read, when literacy was a privilege of the wealthy and the clergy, the town crier became the community's essential link to official knowledge. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't simply check your phone or pick up a newspaper to learn what was happening. The crier was your connection to everything, from when the next market would be held, to what new taxes had been imposed, to whether a child had gone missing and needed to be found. Every announcement mattered. Every word carried weight. The crier spoke for those who could not access the written word, making information democratic in a profoundly undemocratic age. This role went far beyond simple convenience. It was about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their station or education, had access to the information they needed to navigate daily life and remain on the right side of the law. Fact 2. Enforcing civic order, but the town crier was more than just a messenger. These announcements carried real legal force. When the crier proclaimed a new bylaw or a curfew, it became binding on everyone who heard it. There was no excuse of, "I didn't know," once the town crier had made his rounds. Think about what this meant in practical terms. If a curfew was announced requiring all citizens to be indoors after dark, and the crier had walked the streets proclaiming this order, anyone found outside after that hour could face punishment. The crier's voice transformed information into law, made abstract rules tangible and immediate. This gave the position tremendous civic importance. The town crier was helping to maintain order, to keep the social fabric intact. In towns and cities that could sometimes teeter on the edge of chaos, where communication was slow and unrest could spread quickly, the crier served as a stabilizing force, ensuring everyone understood what was expected of them. In this way, the bellman became a guardian of peace, a preventer of misunderstandings that might otherwise lead to conflict or crime. Fact 3. The cry itself. Now, let's listen more carefully to how these proclamations began. You've probably heard the phrase, "Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes," even if you weren't quite sure what it meant or where it came from. This was the traditional opening of a town crier's announcement, a call that demanded attention and silence. The word comes from Old French, from the verb ouïr, meaning to hear. It's a command, really. Hear this. Listen. Pay attention. In English towns, criers often used hear thee, which carries the same urgent meaning. These weren't gentle suggestions. They were declarations that important information was about to be shared, and that every person within earshot had a civic duty to listen. Imagine the crier's voice, trained and strong, cutting through the noise of daily life. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. The words themselves have a rhythm, a kind of music that would make people stop what they were doing. A merchant would pause in his negotiations. A mother would hush her children. Workers would set down their tools. And in that moment of collective attention, the community would become unified in listening. This formula was repeated 3 times for good reason. It gave people time to stop, to turn, to give their full attention. By the third "oh yes," all eyes would be on the crier, and the real message could begin. Fact 4. The bell. But before the "oh yes" came another sound, the ringing of a large handbell. This is why town criers were also known as bellmen. That bell was their signature, their announcement of arrival, their way of gathering a crowd before the words even began. Picture the bell itself, heavy, made of bronze or brass, with a wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. Its ring would carry down narrow streets, bouncing off stone walls, reaching into homes and workshops. People learned to recognize that sound, to know that when they heard it, something important was coming. In some places, different instruments served the same purpose. Drums might be beaten in a particular pattern. Horns might sound a specific call, but the bell was most common, portable and loud, distinctive and impossible to ignore. It became so associated with the role that the bell and the crier were inseparable in people's minds. The bellman would walk his route, ringing as he went, and crowds would naturally gather at central points where they knew he would stop to make his full announcement. It was an elegant system, really. No technology required beyond a well-made bell and a strong arm to ring it. Fact 5. Literacy and status. Now, who could become a town crier? This wasn't a job for just anyone. Criers needed specific skills that set them apart from most of their contemporaries. They had to be able to read and write official texts, which immediately excluded the majority of the population. They needed to project their voice clearly and strongly enough to be heard by large gatherings in open spaces. And they had to carry themselves with authority and dignity in public. These requirements meant that town criers were usually respected townspeople, often of middling social status. They were educated enough to read complex legal language, but common enough to connect with ordinary citizens. They might have been former clerks or men of business who had fallen on hard times but retained their literacy. Some towns appointed local teachers or church officials to the role. The respect they commanded was important. When a crier spoke, people needed to believe they were hearing authentic information from legitimate authority. The crier's personal reputation became intertwined with the trustworthiness of the messages they delivered. A town crier known for clear speech, accurate reading, and dignified bearing would be a valued civic asset. They often dressed distinctively, sometimes in livery provided by the town or crown, wearing a uniform that marked them as official messengers. This visual authority reinforced their verbal authority, making it clear to all who saw them that they spoke not for themselves, but for the powers that governed the community. Fact 6. Payment. How were these important officials compensated for their work? The system was often quite practical. Payment per announcement. In 18th century England, bellmen might receive between 2 and 4 pence for each proclamation they made. This might not sound like much to modern ears, but let's put it in context. A skilled laborer at that time might earn around a shilling a day, 12 pence. So a town crier making multiple announcements could earn a reasonable living. The pay per proclamation system also meant that busier times, when more news needed to be shared, would naturally provide more income. Some criers held the position as a steady employment, particularly in larger towns where announcements were frequent. Others might combine the role with other work, serving as bellmen when needed while maintaining a trade or shop the rest of the time. In smaller communities, it might be almost a part-time position, called upon for important occasions, but not providing a full-time income. The variability of the work also meant that major events like royal proclamations or emergency announcements during times of crisis would bring increased earnings. A crier might make several rounds in a single day during particularly newsworthy periods, each round bringing its small payment. Fact 7. Legal protection. Here's something remarkable. Town criers enjoyed special legal protection. Because they spoke in the name of a monarch or civic authority, harming a crier could be treated as an offense akin to treason. This is where our modern phrase, "Don't shoot the messenger" originates. Think about why this protection was necessary. Criers often delivered unpopular news, new taxes, harsh sentences for criminals, restrictions on trade, changes in law that people didn't like. In the moment of anger upon hearing bad news, someone might lash out at the person delivering it, even though the crier had no role in making the decision. The legal shield around town criers recognized this danger and sought to prevent it. By making it clear that attacking a crier was tantamount to attacking the authority they represented, the law created a buffer of safety. The crier could deliver even the most unwelcome news with some assurance that they would not personally suffer for it. This protection was vital for the system to function. Without it, who would volunteer to announce a new tax increase to an already burdened population? Who would proclaim an unpopular edict? The legal status of the crier made it possible for the machinery of government to communicate with citizens, even when that communication was unwelcome. It's a principle that extends far beyond medieval town squares. The idea that messengers deserve protection, that we shouldn't conflate the person carrying information with the information itself, remains relevant today. Fact 8. Extra duties. The town crier's work didn't end with public announcements during daylight hours. Their duties often extended into the evening and night, and into areas we might not immediately associate with the role. Many criers patrolled at night, serving as watchmen who helped enforce curfews and kept watch for fires. In towns built largely of wood and thatch, where a single flame could destroy entire neighborhoods, having alert watchers moving through the streets after dark was essential. The crier might call out the hours, letting residents know that all was well, or raise the alarm if danger appeared. They also served legal functions beyond simple announcements. A crier might deliver court summonses, ensuring that those required to appear in court received official notice. During public executions, which in that era were community events meant to serve as moral lessons and deterrents, the crier would read out the charges against the condemned, explaining to the gathered crowd exactly what crime had brought about this punishment. Some criers even had formal roles in the execution itself, assisting with final formalities. It was grim work, certainly, but it reflected the crier's position at the intersection of authority and community, official power and public witness. In quieter times, they might help with lost property, announcing found items and reuniting people with misplaced belongings. They might proclaim market regulations, ensuring fair weights and measures. The role was multifaceted, adapting to whatever communication needs the community had. Fact 9. Posting notices. After the crier shouted the news aloud, making his rounds through the streets, the work still wasn't finished. It was common practice for the written version of the proclamation to be posted in a public place, nailed to the door of an inn, a town hall, a market cross, or some other spot where people regularly gathered. This physical posting served multiple purposes. It created a permanent record that literate citizens could read and reread. It allowed those who had missed the crier's rounds to catch up on the news. And it provided verification, a way to check the exact wording of an announcement if there was any dispute about what had been said. This practice is the origin of phrases we still use today. When we talk about posting a notice, we're referring back to this literal act of nailing paper to a post or door. Many newspaper titles include "post" in their names, a direct reference to this tradition of publicly posting written news. The Evening Post, the Washington Post, the New York Post, all carry in their names a memory of the town crier's written notices fluttering on public walls. It's beautiful, in a way, how language preserves these historical practices. Every time we use these phrases, we're unconsciously honoring a tradition that goes back centuries, to a time when news literally had to be posted in a physical space for the community to access it. Fact 10. Historical reach and decline. The tradition of town criers stretched across centuries and continents. The role existed throughout medieval Europe, and as European empires expanded, the practice spread to colonies and settlements around the world. Wherever English, French, or Spanish governance reached, some version of the town crier often followed. In many English towns, the office persisted remarkably late into the modern era. Even as newspapers became more common and literacy rates improved throughout the 19th century, town criers continued their rounds. Some places recorded their last official criers around the 1890s, right at the cusp of the 20th century. By that time, the role had become somewhat ceremonial in many places, a tradition maintained more out of custom than strict necessity. But the fact that it lasted so long speaks to how deeply embedded the practice was in community life. People had grown up hearing the bell and the "oh yes," and there was comfort in that continuity, even as the world around them rapidly changed. Today, a few towns maintain the tradition for ceremonial purposes, particularly in England, where some communities still appoint official town criers who dress in traditional costume and make proclamations at festivals and celebrations. These modern criers are living links to a time when their profession was not a curiosity or a performance, but an essential service, the voice that kept communities informed, ordered, and connected to the larger world beyond their streets. The bell ringer, keeper of time and rhythm. Let your body settle more deeply now. Feel the weight of yourself sinking into comfort. We're continuing our journey through time, and in this segment, we turn our attention to another voice of the past, though this voice spoke not through words, but through sound itself. Bronze and iron, rope and rhythm, the ringing of bells that marked the passage of hours and the turning of seasons. We're exploring the world of the bell ringer. Before alarm clocks sat on every knitstand, before factory whistles pierced the morning air, before the world ran on digital precision, there were bells. And there were the people whose job it was to ring them, calling communities to worship, to work, to celebration, and sometimes to danger. These were the bell ringers, the keepers of communal time. Fact 1. Church duties. The church bell ringers' work followed the sacred calendar as closely as any priests. They sounded bells for daily services, for Sunday worship, for weddings that joined two lives together, and for funerals that marked their ending. Every religious festival had its particular pattern of ringing, a sonic signature that told the community what was being observed. God, imagine being the person responsible for this. You would need to know the church calendar intimately, understanding when certain festivals fell, which saints' days required which patterns of ringing. The clergy, or local custom, would dictate the specific sequences, some simple, some elaborate. A single toll might announce a death, while a joyous peal would cascade through the air for a wedding, each ring tumbling after the last like laughter. These patterns were not arbitrary. They carried meaning. The way the bells rang told people what was happening even before they reached the church. A community member walking through the village could hear the bells and know whether they were being called to evening prayer or whether they should hurry, because a funeral procession was forming. The ringer was translating sacred time into sound, making the invisible rhythms of religious life audible to all. In many ways, the bell ringer was as essential to worship as the building itself. The church might stand silent and empty for much of the week, but the bells, rung at their proper times, kept the spiritual heartbeat of the community steady and strong. Fact 2. Civic and industrial timekeeping, but churches were not the only buildings that needed bells rung. Factories employed bell ringers to mark the start and end of shifts, creating an audible structure for the working day. Schools needed bells to organize the movement of students from classroom to classroom, from lesson to recess, and back again. Think about what this meant in practical terms. In an era when pocket watches were expensive and many workers could not afford them, the factory bell was how you knew when to arrive and when you could finally go home. The bell ringer held, in some sense, the time itself in their hands. They determined when hundreds of workers would stream through factory gates, when machinery would start up, when lunch breaks would begin and end. For students, the school bell, punctuated learning, gave shape to the day. The bell ringer, often a caretaker or janitor who took on this additional duty, became the invisible choreographer of education, moving children through their studies with regular precision. These bells were loud, necessarily so. They had to reach across factory floors filled with the clatter of machinery, or across school grounds where children played. The ringer needed to pull the rope with enough force to make that great bronze voice carry to every corner where it needed to be heard. This was timekeeping made physical and communal. Not a private glance at a watch, but a public announcement that moved everyone together into the next phase of the day. Fact 3. Change ringing in English churches particularly. Bell ringing developed into something quite extraordinary: change ringing. This wasn't simply pulling a rope to make a bell sound. It was a coordinated team effort, following complex mathematical sequences, with experienced ringers pulling ropes in carefully timed patterns. Change ringing is based on the idea that a set of bells, each with a different tone, can be rung in every possible order without repeating a sequence. With 6 bells, for example, there are 720 possible unique sequences. Ringers would work through these permutations, following specific methods with names like Plain Bob or Grandsire. Imagine standing in a ringing chamber with 5 or 7 other people, each holding a rope attached to a bell, weighing hundreds of pounds. You must pull at precisely the right moment, not when you feel like it or when it seems approximately correct, but exactly when the mathematical pattern demands. You're listening to all the bells, tracking your place in the sequence, coordinating with your fellow ringers without speaking, because the sound of the bells drowns out any voice. This required both physical strength and mental discipline. The bells were heavy, and ringing might continue for an hour or more. Your arms would tire, but you couldn't miss your pull. The sequence had to be maintained. Change ringing was a kind of musical mathematics, a performance that was as much athletic as artistic. Experienced change ringers were valued members of their communities, and they took pride in their skill. Some could ring for hours without error. Some could handle the most complex patterns. It was a craft passed down through practice and patience, and those who mastered it were respected for the precision and stamina they demonstrated. Fact 4. Controlling heavy bells. The physical challenge of bell ringing goes beyond mere strength, though strength was certainly required. A church bell might weigh anywhere from a few hundred pounds to well over a ton. These bells weren't simply struck like a gong. They were mounted to swing, and the ringer had to control that swing through the rope. Skilled ringers learned to judge the movement of the rope, to feel through their hands exactly where the bell was in its arc. They needed to keep the bell in rounds, maintaining the proper rhythm without misstrikes or dangerous overswings. Pull too hard and the bell might swing too far, creating chaos in a change ringing sequence or even damaging the mounting. Pull too gently and the bell wouldn't sound properly. There was real danger in this work. A rope attached to a swinging bell carries tremendous force. If you didn't let go at the right moment during certain types of ringing, you could be yanked off. Your feet pulled upward toward the bell chamber, potentially suffering serious injury. Ringers learned to respect the power of the bells they controlled. The rope itself told stories. Over years of use, it would develop wear patterns. Ringers could feel these familiar grooves and texture, knowing their bell by touch as much as by sound. A new rope felt strange, required adjustment. The old rope was like a trusted tool, worn to fit the work perfectly. And all of this had to happen in coordination with others, in spaces that were often cold in winter, sweltering in summer, always filled with the overwhelming sound of bronze. On bronze, the air itself seeming to shake with each peal. Fact 5. Part-time church employment. How were bell ringers compensated for this demanding work? In many parishes, Bell ringers were not full-time employees. Instead, they were hired as part-time church staff, paid small fees for specific events rather than receiving a large fixed salary. A wedding would bring a small payment. A funeral, another. Sunday services might be compensated weekly. Special festivals would add to the income. This piecework approach meant that a ringer's earnings fluctuated with the life of the community. A month with many weddings was a good month. A quiet period meant less income. This arrangement often suited people who had other employment. A shopkeeper might be the bell ringer, closing up for an hour to ring for a service before returning to business. A farmer might ring bells on market days when he was in town anyway. The flexibility allowed communities to have skilled ringers without the expense of a full-time salary. For the ringer, it provided supplemental income and a certain status. Being entrusted with the church bells was an honor of sorts, a recognition of reliability and skill. You were being invited into the functioning of something sacred, made part of the machinery that kept spiritual life running. The fees were modest, certainly. This was never going to make someone wealthy. But in communities where every shilling mattered, where most people lived close to the edge of financial stability, these small regular payments could make a real difference in a family's well-being. Fact 6. Civic employment. Some towns went a step further and retained dedicated civic bell ringers, employees of the municipality rather than the church. These ringers might sound a curfew bell at a set hour each evening, warning people to extinguish fires and return to their homes. They might ring hourly chimes, marking the passage of time for the entire town. The wages for such positions were modest, comparable to other low-ranked municipal service jobs of the 18th and 19th centuries. We're talking about income similar to what a night watchman or street sweeper might earn. It was enough to live on, particularly if combined with other work, but not enough to provide comfort or security. These civic ringers were more than timekeepers, though. They were part of the town's infrastructure, as essential in their way as the people who maintained the roads or kept the water pumps functioning. The bells they rang created an audible framework for civic life, a shared experience of time that unified the community. In some places, the civic ringer also served as an alarm in emergencies. If fire broke out, the bell would ring in a distinctive pattern that sent people running to help. If invaders or bandits approached, the bell would sound a warning. The ringer became, in moments of crisis, the person who could mobilize the entire population through sound alone. It was simple work in one sense: pull a rope at the right times. But the responsibility was significant. Get it wrong, ring at the wrong hour, and you disrupted the entire town's rhythm. People would arrive late to work or show up when nothing was scheduled. Trust was essential. Fact 7. The soundscape of community. Let's pause to consider what bells meant to the communities that heard them. These weren't just signals. They were the voice of collective life, marking rhythms that everyone shared. The bells called people to worship, making spirituality a public, communal experience rather than a private one. They warned of fires or invasions, uniting people in response to danger. They celebrated victories, letting joy ripple out across town and countryside. Before bells, how did people coordinate? How did a community move together? With bells, suddenly there was a way to speak to everyone at once. The bell ringer, then, held a visible role in the soundscape of pre-industrial towns. Everyone heard their work. Everyone depended on it. Think about how different this is from modern life, where we each carry personal devices that tell us individually what time it is, where we receive private notifications about events and emergencies. The bell was gloriously public, indiscriminate. Rich and poor, young and old, everyone heard the same bell at the same moment. It created a kind of equality of experience, a shared temporal landscape. The specific tones of local bells became familiar, beloved even. People grew up hearing certain patterns, associating particular sounds with particular meanings. A village bell might sound different from the town bell 5 miles away, giving each place its own sonic identity. When you heard your home bell from a distance, returning from travel, you knew you were truly coming home. The bell ringer was the curator of this soundscape, the guardian of these sonic traditions. Their work was ephemeral. Sound vanishes the moment it's created, yet also deeply permanent in its effects on how communities experience time and togetherness. Fact 8. Inherited roles in some communities. Being a bell ringer wasn't just a job, but almost a birthright. Long-serving ringers became locally known figures, respected for their years of faithful service. And when they grew too old to continue, or when they died, often the role would pass to a son or daughter, nephew, or niece. Bell ringing became an inherited tradition, a family specialty. This inheritance made sense in several ways. The younger generation would learn by apprenticeship, standing with an experienced ringer, learning the feel of the ropes, the timing of the pulls, the specific requirements of local custom. By the time the older ringer retired, the younger one would already be thoroughly trained, ensuring continuity of skill and practice. There was also a kind of trust involved. If a family had proven themselves reliable ringers for a generation, why not continue the relationship? The community knew what they were getting. The family knew the expectations. It was a comfortable arrangement for everyone involved. Some bell-ringing families took great pride in their multi-generational service. Records were kept, sometimes spanning centuries, showing that the same family name appeared again and again in church or civic ledgers as the designated ringer. This created a personal history, intertwined with the history of the institution itself. Imagine being a young person in such a family, learning that this would be your responsibility, that you were being prepared to take your place in a tradition stretching back generations. There would be pride in that, certainly, but also pressure. You couldn't be the one who broke the chain, who rang poorly or unreliably. You carried not just your own reputation, but your family's. Fact 9. The coming of automation, but nothing lasts forever, and the age of the human bell ringer was drawing to a close even as the 19th century waned. Technology began to offer alternatives that were cheaper and more consistent than human labor. Mechanical striking clocks emerged, capable of ringing bells at precise intervals without human intervention. The mechanism simply needed to be wound regularly, and it would perform its duty hour after hour, day after day, with perfect consistency. No sick days, no need for payment, no risk of someone oversleeping and missing the dawn bell. Electrified bell hammers came next, allowing bells to be rung from a distance or automatically by timer systems. Later still, loudspeakers began to appear, capable of broadcasting recorded bell sounds or other audio signals without needing actual bells at all. For the bell ringers, this technological change meant the gradual disappearance of their profession. One by one, parishes and factories and schools installed automated systems. The work that had employed generations vanished over the course of a few decades. It wasn't always a clean transition. Some communities resisted, preferring the human touch, the knowledge that a neighbor was ringing the bells rather than a machine. Some ringers fought to keep their positions. But economics and efficiency won out in most places. Why pay someone to do what a mechanism could do more reliably and cheaply? The ringers who lost their positions had to find new work, often at older ages when learning new skills was difficult. It was a personal tragedy repeated across thousands of towns. This displacement of human workers by advancing technology, a story as old as progress itself. Fact 10. The modern era. By the 20th century, the transformation was largely complete. Regular paid bell ringer posts had disappeared in many places. Where bell ringing continued, it was often taken over by volunteers, usually members of change-ringing societies who practiced the art for love of the craft rather than for money. Automatic systems handled the routine timekeeping functions. Ringing was retained for ceremonial occasions in some places, royal events, special celebrations, important commemorations. But this was nostalgia, heritage preservation, a nod to tradition rather than a functional necessity. The bells still rang, but the profession of bell ringer had become, for all practical purposes, obsolete. Today, if you visit certain English churches, you might still find change-ringing societies practicing their intricate sequences, maintaining a tradition that goes back centuries. These are hobbyists and enthusiasts, not employees. They ring for the joy of it, for the satisfaction of mastering. A difficult skill for the connection to history. The automatic systems that replaced human ringers generally work well. They're reliable and precise. But something has been lost too. The knowledge that a human being was choosing to ring the bell was physically present in that moment, connected the sound to human intention in a way that automation cannot quite replicate. When you heard a bell rung by a human, you knew that someone had made an effort, had climbed the tower stairs, had pulled the rope. There was care in it, attention, presence. The mechanical bell rings on schedule regardless of snow, or storm, joy, or sorrow. The human ringer brought weather, brought mood, brought life to the work. The knocker-upper, human alarm clock. Let yourself sink even deeper now into stillness and comfort. Your breathing is slow and steady. Your mind is quiet. We continue our gentle exploration of forgotten professions, and in this segment, we encounter perhaps the most ironic of all. A person whose entire job was to prevent sleep, to interrupt dreams, to pull people from the very rest you're settling into now. This is the story of the knocker-upper, the human alarm clock. Picture the darkness before dawn in an industrial town. Streets are silent, except for footsteps, purposeful, measured footsteps moving from house to house. A figure appears beneath a window, raises a long pole, and tap, tap, tap. The sound is precise, insistent, but not angry. And inside, someone stirs, wakes, prepares to face another day of labor. This was the knocker-upper at work. Fact 1. The basic role, the knocker-upper's purpose, was beautifully simple in concept. Wake people up so they could get to work on time. This was especially crucial during the Industrial Revolution in Britain and Ireland, when factories, mines, and mills ran on strict schedules, and workers faced serious consequences for arriving late. Imagine being a factory worker in the 1800s. Your shift starts at 6 in the morning. If you arrive late, you might be locked out and lose a day's wages. Or you might be fined, the penalty deducted from your already meager pay. Or you might even lose your position entirely, replaced by one of the many desperate people looking for work. Punctuality wasn't just a virtue. It was an economic necessity, sometimes the difference between feeding your family and going hungry. But how could you ensure you'd wake on time? You couldn't rely on natural light many workers needed to rise well before dawn. You couldn't count on roosters in a crowded urban environment. You needed something reliable, something that would pull you from sleep at the precise hour required. The knocker-upper was that solution. For a small fee, you could hire someone whose job was to make sure you woke up. They would arrive at your home at the agreed-upon time and make enough noise at your window to rouse you from sleep. Simple, effective, and crucially, affordable. For working-class families who had few other options, this was the entire job. Move through darkened streets, wake people up, move on. Yet in its simplicity lay its importance. Entire households depended on this service. Entire factory shifts relied on these early morning wake-up calls to ensure workers arrived on time and production could begin. Fact 2. Why the job existed. You might wonder, why didn't people just use alarm clocks? The answer tells us something important about life during the Industrial Revolution. Mechanical alarm clocks did exist during this period, but they presented two significant problems for working-class households. First, they were expensive. A reliable clock represented a substantial investment, possibly costing as much as a week's wages or more. For families living on tight budgets, where every penny had to be carefully allocated for food, rent, and basic necessities, purchasing a clock was often simply impossible. It was a luxury beyond reach. Second, even if a family managed to afford a clock, early mechanical timepieces were not always reliable. They might run fast or slow. They might stop entirely if not wound properly. They might fail at the worst possible moment. Trusting your livelihood to a mechanical device that might or might not work was a risk many people couldn't afford to take. The knocker-upper offered something that even the finest clock could not: human reliability with built-in redundancy. If you didn't wake up immediately, they would keep knocking. If your window was difficult to reach, they would find a way. If you were a particularly heavy sleeper, they would persist until you showed yourself at the window or opened the door. They adapted to circumstances in ways that a mechanical device simply could not. And so, for decades, having another human being wake you up made more economic sense than relying on technology. It's a reminder that technological progress doesn't always follow a straight line, and that sometimes older methods persist because they genuinely work better for people's actual circumstances. Fact 3. Tools of the trade the knocker-upper needed. Tools that would wake the intended person without disturbing everyone else on the street. This required some ingenuity. The most common implement was a baton, short club, or long, light pole often made of bamboo because it was lightweight yet long enough to reach upper-story windows. Picture this tool. Perhaps 8 or 10 feet long, thin enough to be maneuvered easily through narrow streets, strong enough to make a satisfying tap against glass without breaking it. The knocker-upper would position themselves beneath the correct window, raise the pole, and tap in a distinctive pattern. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. The technique was crucial. Too soft and the person wouldn't wake. Too hard and you might crack the glass, or wake the neighbors, or draw complaints. The experienced knocker-upper developed a perfect touch, firm enough to penetrate sleep, but controlled enough to avoid damage or excessive disturbance, not working in darkness or preyed on dimness, often with streets that looked similar and rows of identical houses. The knocker-upper had to be absolutely certain they were tapping at the right window. Getting it wrong meant waking someone who didn't pay for the service, which would lead to angry complaints and possibly the loss of that client, or worse, a confrontation with an irritated person who'd been unnecessarily pulled from sleep. The pole itself became a familiar sight in industrial towns. Children would recognize the distinctive silhouette of the knocker-upper moving through the streets, pole in hand, a figure who existed in that liminal time between night and day, between sleep and waking. Fact 4. Alternative methods, not all. Knocker-uppers used poles. Some employed a more creative method, pea shooters. They would load dried peas into a long tube and blow them at window panes. The peas would strike the glass with a sharp little sound enough to wake the sleeper, but not loud enough to disturb the whole neighborhood. This method became particularly associated with Mary Smith, an East London knocker-upper who worked into the 1930s and became somewhat famous for her technique. Imagine her, an older woman moving through the streets with her pea shooter, her pockets full of dried peas, knowing exactly which window required how many peas to wake its occupant. Pea shooter method had certain advantages. It was quieter than banging with a pole. It left no risk of broken windows. And there was something almost gentle about it. Wake up. Here's your little tap of a pea against the glass. Time to start your day. The peas themselves could be reused if gathered up, making the method economical. In earlier periods, some knocker-uppers carried another tool entirely, A snuffer-outer. This was originally a device used to extinguish gas lamps at dawn when street lighting was no longer needed. The same person who put out the lamps would also wake people as they made their rounds, using the snuffer-outer to rap on doors or windows. It was an efficient combination of duties, making a single early morning job serve two purposes for the municipality or for private employment. Each of these tools and methods reflects the practicalities of the work, making noise at a specific location at a specific time in a way that achieved the goal without creating problems. Fact 5. Who did this work? The knocker-upper job attracted a particular demographic. It was commonly done by elderly men and women who found this work suited their circumstances. Perhaps they could no longer handle physically demanding labor in factories or mines, but they could still walk the streets and tap on windows. Perhaps they needed income but wanted work that didn't require the stamina of youth. Pregnant women sometimes took on the role as well. In an era when pregnancy often meant leaving other employment, when there were few options for earning money while carrying a child, the knocker-upper job offered flexibility and relatively light physical demands. You could work until quite late in pregnancy if you remained able to walk the routes. For many, this was supplementary income, a way to add a few shillings to the household budget. The work required being an early riser, but for older people who often wake before dawn anyway, this wasn't necessarily a hardship. It required reliability and punctuality. You had to be there when you said you would, but not special skills or training. There's something touching about this, isn't there? A job that could be performed by those whom the industrial economy might otherwise have cast aside. The elderly, the pregnant, those not fit for factory work. They found a niche, a way to contribute and earn in a system that often had little place for them. Police constables on night duty also sometimes supplemented their wages by acting as knocker-uppers along their patrol routes. This made perfect sense. They were already out in the streets in the early morning hours, already moving through the neighborhoods. Why not earn a bit extra by tapping on a few windows as they walked their beats? It was a way to make the most of time that would be spent patrolling anyway. Fact 6. The pre-dawn routine. Let's follow a knocker-upper through their morning. They would begin their rounds well before dawn, perhaps at 3 or 4 in the morning, when the world was still deep in darkness. They might cover many streets, moving from house to house according to a carefully memorized or written schedule. Each client had their own specified wake-up time. Mrs. Johnson at number 12 needs to be up at 4:30. Mr. Brown at number 17 needs his call at 5. The factory workers on Mill Street all need to be roused by 5:15. The knocker-upper carried all these times in their head, or perhaps on a piece of paper consulted by the light of the street lamps. The work required excellent time management and route planning. You couldn't backtrack excessively, or you'd waste time and might miss someone's window. You had to move efficiently through your territory, arriving at each location at just the right moment. In winter, this meant walking through cold, often through rain or snow. In summer, it meant rising even earlier to catch people before the dawn came. There was a rhythm to it, a meditation almost. Street after street, window after window, tap, 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 move on. The town slowly coming to life around you as lights began appearing in windows, as the first workers emerged from their homes and headed toward the factories. You were the catalyst for all of this awakening, the person who set the daily machinery of industry in motion, and you had to be reliable. If you overslept, if you got sick, if you simply didn't show up, people would be late for work. They would lose wages. They might lose jobs. The responsibility was real, and it rested entirely on your shoulders, or rather, on your ability to wake up even earlier than everyone else. Fact 7. The paradox. This leads us to an obvious question, one that often provokes smiles when people learn about knocker-uppers. who woke up the knocker-upper? It's a legitimate paradox. If you need someone to wake you for work, and the knocker-upper needs to wake up even earlier than you to do their job, how did they ensure their own punctuality? The answers varied. Some knocker-uppers were naturally early risers, people whose internal clocks reliably woke them at 3 or 4 in the morning, regardless of external aids. Some did invest in alarm clocks, making the expense worthwhile because their livelihood depended on it. Some used multiple clocks as backup, ensuring redundancy. Others arranged with family members or neighbors to wake them, creating informal networks of mutual awakening. And some knocker-uppers would knock each other up, with earlier risers waking those whose rounds started a bit later. It was a system built on trust and interdependence, each person in the chain responsible for the next. There's something both practical and philosophical about this question. It reminds us that every system depends on something or someone outside itself. The knocker-upper waking, the workers depended on their own waking. And behind that might be another person, or a clock, or simply the remarkable ability of some people to wake consistently at the same early hour through habit and necessity alone. Fact 8, payment and economics. How much did this service cost? Clients typically paid a small weekly fee for their regular wake-up call. The amounts varied by location and era, but often we're talking about just a few pence per week. Some accounts mention 6 pence a week as a common rate. To put this in context, a skilled laborer in the late 19th century might earn around 20 to 30 shillings a week. 6 pence represented about 2 to 3% of that weekly wage. It was affordable, barely, for working-class families. Not free, but cheaper than buying and maintaining a clock, and more reliable. For the knocker-upper, the economics worked through volume. If you could manage 50 or 60 clients on your rounds, charging 6 pence each, you might earn 25 or 30 shillings a week, a modest but livable income. The work was seasonal in some respects, with more clients in winter when darkness lasted longer and people were harder to wake naturally. Payment usually happened weekly, collected on a set day. This required the knocker-upper to remember who had paid and who owed, to track accounts in their head or on paper. Some clients were reliable payers. Others might fall behind, requiring the knocker-upper to decide whether to continue the service on credit or to stop knocking until the debt was settled. It was precarious work in that sense. Your income depended on your client's continued employment, their willingness to pay, their need for your service. If someone bought a clock, you lost that income. If a factory closed and workers moved away, your route became less profitable. Fact 9. Variations in service. The quality and style of service varied among knocker-uppers. Some were conscientious, waiting at a window until they saw definite signs that the person was awake, a face appearing at the glass, a hand waving acknowledgement, a lamp being lit inside. They wouldn't move on until they were certain their job was done. Others operated on a tighter schedule and couldn't afford to wait. They would give their agreed-upon series of taps and move on quickly to the next client, trusting that the sleeper would rouse. This was more efficient, but risked leaving people still asleep if the knocks hadn't been sufficient. Some knocker-uppers developed reputations for reliability and thoroughness, and could charge slightly more because clients trusted they would definitely be awakened. Others competed on price, offering cheaper service, but with less guarantee of personal attention. There were probably knocker-uppers who took pride in their work, who knew each client personally, who understood that Mr. Thompson was a heavy sleeper and needed extra knocking while Mrs. Davies woke at the slightest sound. These knocker-uppers brought a human touch to what could have been a purely mechanical transaction, and there were likely those who did the minimum, who resented the early hours and the weather, who knocked perfunctorily and moved on whether anyone woke or not. As with any profession, The quality varied with the individual performing it. Fact 10. Decline and disappearance. The knocker-upper profession lasted well into the 20th century in some areas. Mary Smith, the famous East London pea-shooter knocker-upper, was still working in the 1930s, but the writing was on the wall, or rather on the knit stand. Alarm clocks became cheaper and more reliable. Mass production brought prices down. By the 1920s and 1930s, a decent alarm clock was affordable for most working-class households. And these clocks, improved through decades of refinement, were now dependable. They didn't forget, didn't oversleep, didn't fail to show up on rainy mornings. Economics shifted. Why pay 6 pence a week, adding up to over £1 a year, when you could buy a clock once and use it indefinitely? The personal service, the human reliability, these advantages mattered less when the technology finally caught up. One by one, knocker-uppers lost their clients. Some adapted by taking on other work. Some retired, their occupation simply ceasing to exist. By mid-century, the profession had vanished almost entirely, surviving only in memories and photographs. In the stories told by elderly people who remembered being woken by a tap at the window in their youth. Today, the knocker-upper seems quaint, almost absurd paying someone to wake you up. But for the people who relied on this service, it was neither quaint nor absurd. It was essential infrastructure, the difference between employment and joblessness, between making rent and falling behind. It was as serious and necessary as any modern service we take for granted. The lamplighter, keeper of the night's glow, breathes slowly now, deeply and gently. Feel yourself settling into this moment of rest. We continue our journey through the world of forgotten work, and in this segment, we step into the gathering dusk of a city street centuries ago. The sun is setting, shadows lengthening between buildings, and through the dimming light comes a figure with a long pole, moving from lamp to lamp, bringing light to the darkness. This is the lamplighter, and tonight we walk their route together. Before electricity flowed through wires at the flip of a switch, before automatic systems could illuminate entire cities in an instant, light had to be brought to each lamp individually, by hand, by a person who walked the streets at twilight. Let's follow them now, and let their steady, patient work lull you into deeper rest. Fact 1. The daily rounds, the lamplighter's work followed the rhythms of the sun itself. As dusk approached, they would begin their route, walking along fixed paths through the city streets. In their hands, they carried a long pole, and at its end burned a small flame or glowed a lit wick. This was their tool, their means of bringing light to the city. They would stop at each lamp along their route, raise the pole, and touch the flame to the wick or gas jet inside the lamp's glass enclosure. There would be a moment of contact, a brief pause, and then light would bloom, warm and steady, pushing back a small sphere of darkness. Then they would move on to the next lamp, and the next, marking their progress through the streets with pools of illumination left in their wake. Imagine watching this from a window as evening fell. You would see the lamplighter approaching from down the street, the lamps behind them already glowing, the ones ahead still dark. They moved with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly where each lamp stood, how to position the pole, how long to hold the flame to ensure a proper lighting. It was almost like watching someone conducting an orchestra of light, bringing each instrument in at precisely the right moment. And when dawn came, they walked the route again, this time using a hook on the same pole to extinguish each lamp. The day had arrived. Artificial light was no longer needed. The lamps would rest until evening summoned them again. And the lamplighter would rest too, their work done until the sun once more began its descent. This was the core of the job. Twice daily walks through the city, lighting and extinguishing, bringing illumination, and then taking it away, following the eternal cycle of day and night. Fact 2. maintaining the flame, but lighting and extinguishing were only part of the work. Before the widespread adoption of gas lighting, lamplighters tended candle and oil lamps, and this required considerably more effort and skill. These lamps didn't simply need to be lit. They needed constant maintenance to function properly. The oil reservoirs had to be refilled regularly. Running out of oil meant a dark lamp, a gap in the city's lighting, and possibly a reprimand from authorities. The lamplighter had to judge carefully how much oil each lamp required, carrying enough to service their entire route without the burden of excess weight. The wicks needed trimming. As candle or lamp wicks burned, they would develop carbon buildup. That made the flame smoky and dim. A skilled lamplighter would trim each wick to just the right length, ensuring a clean, bright flame that would burn steadily through the night without producing excessive smoke or consuming oil too quickly. Glass enclosures had to be cleaned. Soot and grime would accumulate on the inside of the glass, dimming the light. Rain and dirt would coat the outside. The lamplighter carried cleaning cloths and would wipe down the glass regularly, ensuring that the light burned clear and bright. As their instructions typically specified, this maintenance work was meticulous and never-ending. Each lamp was a small machine requiring regular attention. Neglect any aspect of this care, and the lamps would fail in their purpose. The lamplighter was not just an igniter of flames, but a caretaker of light itself, ensuring that the city's illumination remained constant and reliable. Fact 3. Historical development street lighting, as we understand, it developed gradually in European cities beginning in the 16th century. Before this, night in cities was profoundly dark, dangerous, a time when honest citizens stayed indoors and the streets belonged to those with ill intent. As municipal authorities recognized the value of lighting streets, both for extending productive hours and for improving safety, systems of public lamps began to appear. And with these systems came the need for people to maintain them. The lamplighter became a common figure in urban streets once regular municipal lighting systems were introduced. Picture what this meant for city life. Before street lighting, venturing out after dark was hazardous. You might stumble over obstacles, fall into holes or open sewers, or encounter criminals taking advantage of the darkness. With lamps, streets became navigable, safer, more civilized. Commerce could continue later into the evening. People could visit neighbors, attend events, move through their city with less fear. The lamplighter was central to this transformation. They were the person who made the system work, who ensured that the lamps actually provided light when darkness fell. Without them, the expensive infrastructure of posts and lamps and fuel would have been useless. They were the human element. That turned technology into service, and so they became familiar figures, recognized in their neighborhoods, expected at their appointed times. When the lamplighter came down your street, you knew evening had truly arrived. Their presence marked time as surely as the church bells or the factory whistles. Fact 4. The name and its history. The term lamplighter appears in English by at least 1752, giving us a definite point in the written record. But the work existed before it had this formal name, carried out under less formal titles as cities experimented with lighting systems and worked out how best to maintain them. There's something satisfying about the word itself, lamplighter. It's descriptive and simple, telling you exactly what the person does. Lighter of lamps. It has a poetic quality too, a kind of rhythm. Say it slowly, lamplight. 3 syllables, each distinct, building to describe someone who brings light. The job title joined other occupational surnames that described work. Cooper, Miller, Smith, Baker. In an earlier era, a person's profession often became their family. Name, a permanent record of what they or their ancestors did. There are likely people today whose distant relatives were lamplighter's, carrying that history forward in surnames derived from the occupation. But beyond the formal term, lamplighters would have been known by more casual names in their communities. The Lightman, perhaps, or simply by their personal names, recognized on sight by the residents of the streets they served. They were part of the daily life, as familiar as the baker or the milk seller, each performing their essential service. In the functioning of the city. Fact 5. Work organization and contracts. Municipal authorities, or town commissions, typically hired lamplighters through formal contracts that specified exactly what was expected. These contracts might detail duties such as lighting lamps from sunset to sunrise, keeping lamps in good repair, and immediately replacing any that were broken. Penalty clauses were common: fail to light a lamp, neglect maintenance, and you might face fines or dismissal. This formality tells us something important. Lighting was serious business. It wasn't casual work left to whoever happened to be available. Cities invested significant money in lighting infrastructure and wanted to ensure it was properly maintained. The contracts protected both the city's interests and, to some extent, the lamplighter's position. A lamplighter reading their contract would see their entire job laid out in legal language. They would know exactly how many lamps they were responsible for, what tools they needed to provide themselves, what standards their work had to meet. They would understand the consequences of failure. This created clear expectations, and when things went well, stable employment. Some contracts specified backup arrangements. If a lamplighter fell ill or couldn't complete their rounds for some reason, who would substitute? How would continuity of service be ensured? The city couldn't simply accept dark streets because one person was unwell. Systems had to be robust. For the lamplighter, the contract represented security, but also pressure. They were bound by its terms, obligated to perform regardless of weather or personal circumstances. The lamps had to be lit, had to be maintained, and any failure would be documented and potentially punished. Fact 6. Working conditions. The work was physically demanding and often uncomfortable. Lamplighters worked in all weather, but especially during the darker winter months when lighting was needed for longer periods each day. Rain, snow, wind, cold, none of these excused them from their rounds. The lamps had to be lit regardless of conditions. Some lamplighters covered hundreds of lamps on their routes, walking miles each day, stopping at each lamp, raising the heavy pole repeatedly, climbing ladders to reach higher lamps, carrying supplies. It was exhausting work. Your arms would ache from holding the pole. Your legs would tire from the constant walking. In winter, your hands would grow numb from cold and wet. Many lamplighters had assistants, frequently boys, who helped carry the burden. These assistants would manage the ladders needed for reaching high lamps, carry oil cans and cleaning supplies, hold spare wicks and tools. They learned the trade by doing it, perhaps aspiring to become full lamplighters themselves one day. The relationship between lamplighter and assistant was important. A good assistant made the work much easier, helped you maintain your schedule, ensured you had what you needed when you needed it. Training an assistant required patience, passing on the small skills and knowledge. That made the difference between adequate and excellent work. And always there was the pressure of time. You had to complete your route before full darkness fell. Couldn't dawdle at any lamp. In winter, when night came early, the window for lighting was compressed. You moved quickly, efficiently, quick as a lamplighter, as the saying went, from lamp to lamp to lamp. Fact 7. Status and pay. Despite its importance for public safety and urban functioning, lamplighting was generally regarded as low-status work. In 19th century employment lists, lamplighters might be grouped with scavengers, people who cleaned streets and collected refuse, or other menial city workers. It wasn't skilled labor in the eyes of those who classified occupations. It was simply necessary work that someone had to do. Pay reflected this status. Examples from the 1870s show weekly wages ranging roughly from 8 to 16 shillings for regular lamplighters. Some senior lamplighters, perhaps those with larger routes or supervisory responsibilities, might earn around 20 shillings £1 a week. This was comparable to other working-class service jobs, enough to survive on, but not enough for comfort or security. A lamplighter earning 12 shillings a week would be making perhaps £3 a month. From this, they would need to pay rent, buy food, clothe themselves and any family, cover all the expenses of life. There wasn't much margin for error, for illness, for unexpected costs. It was the precarious existence typical of working-class urban life in that era. Yet despite the low pay and status, the work mattered. The lamplighter might not be respected the way a craftsman or professional was, but their absence would be immediately and keenly felt. Dark streets meant danger, meant difficulty, meant a city that didn't function as it should. The lamplighter's contribution was essential, even if it wasn't honored. Some found dignity in the work anyway, took pride in well-maintained lamps, in reliable service, in being the person people depended on to bring light to the darkness. Status and pay don't fully determine the meaning people find in their work. Fact 8. Cultural impact. The lamplighter left traces in language and culture that persist even now, long after the profession vanished. The expression, "quick as a lamplighter," entered English to describe someone who moves very fast, reflecting how rapidly lamplighters had to climb ladders, light lamps, and move along their routes to complete their work before full darkness arrived. Think about what it meant for a profession to generate its own idiom. The lamplighter's speed, their efficient movement through the streets, was so notable that it became a reference point for quickness. When you wanted to say someone was fast, you compared them to a lamplighter. The phrase appears in literature, in common speech, becoming part of how people described speed and efficiency. Beyond language, lamplighters had symbolic presence. They represented the boundary between day and night, safety and danger, civilization and chaos. Artists depicted them in paintings and illustrations. Writers included them in stories and poems. They became part of the romantic image of the city, alongside gas-lit streets and foggy evenings. In some communities, lamplighters doubled as informal watchmen. Their visible nightly rounds contributed to the perception of order and security on city streets. Knowing that the lamplighter was out there, moving through the neighborhood, provided reassurance. If something went wrong, a fire, a crime, an emergency, the lamplighter might be the first to notice, to raise an alarm, to summon help. They were witnesses to the night, to the city when most people were indoors. They saw things others didn't. The late workers heading home, the early risers beginning their days, the nocturnal activities both innocent and otherwise. They held a unique position, belonging neither fully to day nor night, but to the transition between them. Fact 9. The coming of gas lighting transformed the lamplighter's work, but didn't immediately eliminate it. When gas lamps spread widely, in the 19th century, they still needed manual operation. A lamplighter would walk the route, turning on the gas flow and igniting each lamp, then return to turn them off. Gas made some aspects easier, no more refilling oil, trimming wicks, or extensive cleaning, but it introduced new challenges. Gas lamps required different skills, understanding pressure and flow, knowing how to adjust valves properly. The system was more efficient, but also more complex. The real change came with automatic ignition systems developed in the late 19th century. These systems could turn gas lamps on and off according to preset timers, or could be controlled centrally from a single location. Suddenly, one person could illuminate an entire district with the turn of a valve, rather than requiring someone to visit each lamp individually. This was the beginning of the end for lamplighters. Their core function, the physical act of lighting each lamp, was being automated away. Some found work maintaining the new systems, checking for malfunctions, making repairs. But the daily rounds, the twice-daily walks through the streets, were becoming unnecessary. The automation represented progress, certainly. It was more efficient, more reliable, cheaper in the long run. But it also meant the disappearance of a human presence on the streets, the loss of those familiar figures moving through the twilight with their poles and flames. Fact 10. Electric. Dawn. The final blow came with electric streetlights in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Electric lights could be controlled centrally with switches and timers. They required no daily attention, no lighting and extinguishing. They simply turned on when commanded and off when no longer needed. The transition wasn't immediate. Cities converted gradually, often starting in central areas and working outward. For a time, you might see gas lamps in one neighborhood and electric lights in another. Some lamplighters adapted, becoming electricians or maintenance workers. Others retired or found entirely different work as their positions were eliminated. By the early 20th century, the lamplighter had become a historical curiosity in most places, a profession that existed in living memory, but no longer in practice. Children would ask their grandparents about the old days, about how the streets were lit before electricity, and the grandparents would describe the lamplighter making their rounds, bringing light to the darkness, one lamp at a time. The efficiency gains were enormous, undeniable. Centralized electric lighting was cheaper, more reliable, safer. It made perfect economic sense. But something was lost too: the human element, the visible presence of someone caring for the city's light, the connection between person and lamp that the old system had maintained. Today, our streets are brilliantly lit, safer than they've ever been. We flip switches without thinking, take illumination for granted. We've gained so much. But on quiet evenings, when streetlights flicker on automatically as dusk falls, perhaps we can spare a thought for the lamplighters who once walked these routes by hand, bringing light to the darkness, one lamp at a time. The Canal Boat Legger. Walking the darkness let your breathing become even slower now, deeper and more rhythmic. Feel yourself drifting further into rest with each breath. We journey now to the waterways of Britain, to the network of canals that once carried the commerce of an industrializing nation. But we're going underground, into the darkness of long tunnels where horses couldn't go and oars couldn't reach. Here, in the black water beneath the earth, we meet perhaps the strangest workers of all, the Canal Boat Leggers who walked boats through darkness using nothing but the strength of their legs against stone. Close your eyes and imagine descending into that tunnel, the light fading behind you, the sound of water lapping against stone echoing in the confined space. And imagine the leggers lying on their backs or sides, feet moving in steady rhythm against the walls, propelling tons of boat and cargo forward through the void. Fact 1. The technique, the method itself, sounds almost impossible until you picture it clearly. Legging involved two people lying on a plank or board laid across the bow of the boat. They would grip this board with their hands to hold themselves in position, then walk their feet along the tunnel walls, pushing the boat forward with the pressure of their legs. Imagine the position. You're lying on your side or at an angle, your upper body on the narrow plank, your legs extended toward the tunnel wall. The wall is wet, slippery with condensation and algae, cold to the touch. But you find purchase, plant your feet, and push. The boat moves, perhaps only inches at first, but it moves. You reposition your feet higher up on the wall and push again, and again, and again, in a rhythm that must be maintained for miles. Your partner on the other side is doing the same thing. Their push is coordinated with yours, so the boat moves straight ahead rather than veering into the wall. If you push too hard while they're repositioning, the boat will angle toward them. If they push while you're moving your feet, it will swing your way. You work together, finding a rhythm, a pattern of push and repetition that becomes almost automatic. This is legging. Using your own body as the engine, the tunnel walls as your track, the strength of your legs as the propulsion system for a boat. Weighing several tons. It sounds like it shouldn't work, that human muscle couldn't possibly move such mass through water. But it did work for decades as the primary means of moving boats through these underground passages. The technique was simple in concept, but demanding in execution. You needed strength, certainly, but also endurance, coordination, and the ability to work in uncomfortable positions for extended periods in complete or near complete darkness. Fact 2. Variations in technique. Not all tunnels were the same, and leggers had to adapt their method to the specific conditions they encountered. In some tunnels, especially low ones where the roof came close to the water surface, leggers would lie on their backs on the cabin roof and push against the tunnel roof instead of the side walls. Picture this variation. You're lying flat on your back, the curved stone roof of the tunnel passing just above your face. Your hands grip whatever holds you can find on the boat. Your feet find the rough stone overhead, and you push, driving yourself and the boat forward. The stone scrapes past, inches from your nose. You feel the texture of it, the wetness, the occasional protrusions that require you to adjust quickly to avoid a blow to the face. This method required perhaps even more nerve than wall walking. The roof was closer, more threatening, less forgiving of errors, but it provided good purchase when the walls were too far apart or too smooth to push against effectively. The legger adapted, used whatever surface was available, whatever method would move the boat. Some leggers became specialists in particular tunnels, knowing exactly which technique worked best in which sections, where the walls were rougher and provided better grip, where the roof lowered and required switching methods. This knowledge was valuable, earned through experience, and sometimes painful trial and error. The ability to adapt, to switch between techniques as conditions demanded, separated the skilled professional legger from the amateur boat crew trying to leg their own vessel through. The professionals made it look easier than it was, their movements practiced and efficient where others would struggle and tire quickly. Fact 3. The historical context. Professional leggers emerged during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the height of Britain's canal age. This was when the canal network was expanding rapidly, connecting industrial centers, carrying coal and manufactured goods, serving as the arteries of economic growth before railways dominated transport. Many long tunnels were built during this period, and to save construction cost and space, engineers often omitted internal towpaths. On open canal, horses would walk alongside pulling boats, but in these tunnels, the horses had to be led over the hill while the boat went through underneath. This created a need. Someone or something had to propel the boat through the tunnel. Boat crews could do the legging themselves, and many did, but it was exhausting work, and time was money. A crew that had spent 3 hours struggling to leg through a tunnel would be tired, behind schedule, less able to work efficiently for the rest of the day. Professional leggers offered an alternative. They were fresh, experienced, fast. Hiring them meant your crew could rest or prepare for the next stage of the journey while the boat was moved efficiently through the tunnel. The job represented a kind of niche, specialization that industrial economies create. Here was a specific problem: moving boats through specific tunnels, and people developed expertise in solving it, turning that expertise into a livelihood. It's a reminder that even in historical periods, economies were more complex and specialized than we might assume. Fact 4. Famous tunnels. Leggers worked at well-known long tunnels throughout the canal network, but certain tunnels became particularly associated with the profession. Standage Tunnel in Yorkshire, Blisworth Tunnel in Northamptonshire, Dudley Tunnel in the Black Country, These names would have been familiar to anyone involved in canal transport. These weren't short passages. Standage stretched for more than 3 miles through the Pennine Hills, making it the longest canal tunnel in Britain. Blissworth ran nearly 2 miles. Dudley twisted through almost 2 miles of limestone. The distance and traffic volume at these tunnels made it worthwhile to maintain a regular presence of professional leggers rather than relying on boat crews to manage on their own dot at the tunnel mouths. Leggers would wait for boats to arrive, offering their services. It was a marketplace of sorts, with leggers competing for work, negotiating prices, building relationships with regular customers. Some canal companies employed leggers directly, while others allowed independent operators to work the tunnels. The tunnels themselves became communities in a way. The leggers knew each other, probably had their own social hierarchies and relationships. They shared knowledge about conditions inside, which sections were particularly difficult, where new damage had appeared, where the footing was especially treacherous. They understood these dark passages intimately, knew them by feel and sound, in ways that surface dwellers never could. For people who regularly traveled the canals, these tunnels marked significant points on their journeys. Approaching Standage meant finding and hiring good leggers, meant a pause in normal progress, meant the strange experience of being propelled through darkness by men lying on your boat, walking against stone. Fact 5. Speed and skill the skill. Involved in legging becomes clear when we look at the times achieved by expert leggers. At Standage Tunnel, experienced professionals could propel an empty boat through roughly 3 miles of tunnel in about 1 hour and 20 minutes. With a fully loaded boat, the same passage might take around 3 hours. Think about what this means. An empty boat, relatively light in the water, still required 80 minutes of continuous leg pushing to travel 3 miles. That's more than an hour of lying in an awkward position, feet moving constantly against wet stone, pushing, repositioning, pushing again, maintaining rhythm and coordination with your partner, never stopping except for the briefest moments to adjust position. A loaded boat, heavy with cargo, sitting deeper in the water, creating more resistance, required more than twice as long. 3 hours of this work. Your legs would be screaming with fatigue. Your back would ache from the twisted position. Your hands gripping the board would be cramped and cold. But you continued, because stopping meant the boat would drift backward, meant losing progress, meant extending an already exhausting job. The difference between expert leggers and less skilled workers was dramatic. Professionals knew how to pace themselves, how to find the most efficient rhythm, how to position their bodies to maximize push while minimizing fatigue. They understood the specific characteristics of their tunnel, where the walls provided better purchase, where the current helped or hindered, where brief adjustments in technique could save energy over the long haul. This expertise had real value. Time saved in the tunnel meant more trips completed per day, more cargo delivered, more profit for the boat owner. A good legger wasn't just convenient. They were an economic asset. Fact 6. Compensation for their work propelling a boat through a major tunnel like Standage. A pair of professional leggers could expect to be paid about 1 shilling and 6pence. In the context of early 19th century wages, this was reasonable. Payment for what amounted to 1 to 3 hours of intensely physical labor, though hardly generous. But the key was volume. A professional legger at a busy tunnel might leg multiple boats through in a single day. If you and your partner could manage 4 or 5 boats in a day's work, you might earn 6 to 8 shillings equivalent to a decent day's wage for a laborer in that era. Do this regularly, and legging became a recognizable wage-earning occupation. The work was irregular, of course. Busy days when many boats needed to pass through would be lucrative. Quiet days meant little or no income. Weather affected canal traffic, and seasonal variations in cargo movements meant some periods were busier than others. Winter could be particularly difficult when ice might close the canals entirely. Some leggers supplemented their income with other work, treating legging as one part of a broader strategy for making a living. Others, at the busiest tunnels, might work as leggers full-time during peak seasons. The flexibility was both an advantage. You could choose when to work, and a disadvantage: no guaranteed income, no security. Payment was usually immediate, in cash, at the end of each passage. This suited a population that often lived day to day, where having coins in hand at the end of a job meant being able to eat that night, to pay for lodging, to manage the immediate needs of survival. Fact 7. Danger and death. The romance of canal legging, if there ever was any, quickly fades when we consider the dangers. This was physically hazardous work conducted in conditions that offered little margin for error. Leggers operated in near darkness or complete darkness, lying on narrow boats with hard, wet stone close on either side. The ways to die or be seriously injured were numerous. You could slip from the plank into the water, trapped between the moving boat and the tunnel wall, crushed or drowned before you could be rescued. The water in these tunnels was cold, deep, and dark. If you fell in, disoriented and unable to see, your chances of survival were poor. You could misjudge distance in the darkness and push too hard, driving the boat into the wall with you caught between. The weight of a loaded canal boat could easily kill a person pinned against unyielding stone. Even without fatal crushing, such impacts could break bones, causing injuries that might end a legger's career or cripple them permanently. The stone itself was dangerous. Sharp protrusions could tear skin or clothing. Slippery algae could cause feet to slide at a crucial moment. The constant damp and cold led to chronic health problems, joint pain, respiratory issues from breathing the stale, humid air of the tunnels for hours at a time. Records don't always survive to tell us how many leggers died or were injured in these tunnels, but contemporary accounts make clear that accidents were not uncommon. Families were left without breadwinners. Men were disabled and unable to work. The physical cost of this occupation was high, paid in pain and sometimes in blood. Fact 8. Safety measures to reduce accidents. Various safety measures were eventually introduced. Some tunnels had recessed stones built into the walls, specifically to provide better footholds for leggers. These small architectural features, easy to overlook today, represented an acknowledgement of the leggers' needs and an attempt to make their dangerous work slightly less so. Boats sometimes used additional sideboards, wing boards, extending out from the sides to give leggers a more stable platform. These boards provided more surface area to lie on, making the position less precarious and giving the legger better leverage for pushing. They were a simple adaptation, but one that made a real difference to safety and efficiency. Some tunnel authorities, ISSUED regulations about how legging should be conducted, attempting to standardize practices and reduce risks. Rules about minimum lighting, about the number of leggers required for certain boat sizes, about procedures for passing other boats in the tunnel. These were all efforts to bring order and safety to inherently dangerous work. But regulations and modifications could only do so much. The fundamental nature of the work remained hazardous. You were using your body to move a heavy object through a confined space in darkness, lying in an unstable position with water below and stone on all sides. No amount of regulation could eliminate the basic risks inherent in this activity. The leggers themselves developed informal safety practices, teaching newcomers what to watch for, how to position themselves for maximum safety, when to refuse a job because conditions were too dangerous. This peer-to-peer knowledge sharing probably prevented many accidents, though we have no way to count injuries that didn't happen. Fact 9. Regulation and control. At particularly busy tunnels like Blissworth, canal authorities eventually required leggers to register, and wear brass armlets for identification. This regulation, introduced in the 1820s, served multiple purposes. It helped prevent intimidation of boatmen by ensuring only authorized leggers could work at the tunnel. It brought order to what could be a chaotic trade, with multiple leggers competing for work and sometimes creating conflicts. The brass armlets were a form of licensing, a way of saying this person is an approved legger. Boatmen could hire them, with confidence that they were dealing with someone a canal authority had vetted. For the leggers, registration provided a kind of official recognition, legitimizing their occupation and potentially protecting their income from unlicensed competition. This professionalization of legging represented the occupation at its peak. It had become important enough, involved enough money and traffic to merit formal regulation. The leggers had gone from casual workers to recognized specialists with official status. But this formalization also made the occupation vulnerable to later changes. Once legging was officially organized, it became easier for authorities to phase it out when alternatives became available. The infrastructure of regulation could become the infrastructure of replacement, the brass armlets themselves tangible. Symbols of the profession would eventually become relics, curiosities preserved in canal museums as reminders of this strange and specialized work. Fact 10. Decline and disappearance. The end came gradually, but inexorably. New tunnels were built, with towpaths inside them, like Berwick Tunnel on the Shrewsbury Canal, allowing horses to pull boats through rather than requiring legging. This demonstrated that towpaths were possible. Earlier engineers had simply chosen not to include them to save money and space. Powered boats began to appear, first steam-powered, later diesel-capable of propelling themselves through tunnels without external help. These boats didn't need horses on towpaths or leggers pushing against walls. They carried their own motive power, making them independent of the infrastructure that had supported earlier canal transport. By the late 19th century, legging was no longer a regular occupation. The tunnels still existed, and some boats still passed through them, but the professional leggers had largely disappeared. The work had become a historical curiosity, occasionally demonstrated for tourists interested in how things used to be done. Some former leggers adapted, finding work maintaining canals or operating powered boats. Others left the canal industry entirely, their specialized skills no longer needed. The younger generation didn't learn legging because there was no future in it. Within a couple of decades, the knowledge that had taken years to acquire, the skills that had been so valuable, became obsolete. Today, if you visit these old tunnels, you can walk through them on footpaths or take tourist boats through on special occasions. Sometimes reenactors demonstrate legging, showing visitors how it was done. But it's performance now, not work. The leggers are gone, and the tunnels remember them only in the recessed stones that once provided foothold, in the records of registration and payment, in the stories passed down about the men who walked boats through darkness, using nothing but the strength of their legs. The ice cutter, harvesting winter's bounty. Let yourself settle even more deeply now. Your body is heavy and relaxed. Your mind is quiet and calm. We continue our journey through forgotten occupations, and in this segment, we step out into the bitter cold of a winter morning. The air burns your lungs with each breath. Frost glitters on everything, and before you stretches a frozen lake, its surface transformed into a workplace, a harvest field of ice. Here we meet the ice cutters, who turned winter's freeze into summer's preservation. Imagine standing on that thick ice, hearing the distant sounds of saws and the calls of workers echoing across the frozen expanse. Feel the cold seeping through your boots. Watch the breath clouding from your mouth, and prepare yourself for some of the hardest work imaginable, performed in some of the most unforgiving conditions. Fact 1. The essential service ice cutters provided something we now take: completely for granted the ability to keep food cold. They supplied households, breweries, meat packers, dairies, and railroads with natural ice that would be used to preserve food and cool drinks throughout the warmer months. Long before electric refrigerators existed, think about what life was like without refrigeration. Meat spoiled quickly, unless preserved with salt or smoking. Milk went bad within hours in warm weather. Fresh vegetables and fruits had short lifespans. Dairy products couldn't be stored. The warm months, which brought abundance from gardens and farms, also brought rapid spoilage and waste. Ice changed this equation dramatically. With ice in your icebox at home, you could keep meat for days instead of hours. Milk stayed fresh. Butter remained solid. You could store leftovers. The entire rhythm of household food management transformed with access to ice. For businesses, ice was even more crucial. Breweries needed it to control fermentation temperatures. Meat packers used it to keep carcasses from spoiling during processing and storage. Dairies depended on it to preserve milk and cream. Railroads used it in refrigerated cars to ship perishable goods across long distances, opening new markets and making seasonal foods available year-round. The ice cutters who harvested this essential commodity were, in a very real sense, making modern food distribution possible. They were the invisible foundation of an entire system of preservation and commerce. Fact 2. The season of ice. The work was intensely seasonal, concentrated in the coldest winter months when ice grew thick enough to be safely cut and handled in large blocks. This typically meant January and February in northern regions, sometimes extending into early March if cold weather persisted. Ice needed to be at least a foot thick to support the weight of workers and equipment safely, though cutters preferred ice that was 18 inches or thicker. They would test the thickness regularly, drilling holes or cutting test sections to measure. Too thin, and the work was impossibly dangerous. Too late in the season, and the ice would begin to weaken as temperatures rose. This seasonal nature meant that ice cutting couldn't be a year-round occupation. For most workers, it was something they did for a few intense weeks or months each winter, supplementing income from other seasonal work. Some were farmers with little to do during winter months. Others worked construction or outdoor labor jobs that also slowed or stopped when cold weather arrived. The seasonality created a particular rhythm to the work. When conditions were right, when the ice was thick and weather held cold, everyone worked intensely, racing to harvest as much as possible before the window closed. Long days from dawn to dusk, sometimes even by lantern light in the early morning or evening, trying to maximize the harvest. And then, when winter broke and ice began to melt, the work ended. The tools were cleaned and stored, the ice houses were sealed, and the cutters moved on to whatever came next in their yearly cycle of labor. Fact 3. Simple beginnings. In the early days of ice harvesting, the tools were remarkably simple. Ice. Cutters used axes and chisels, hacking and chopping their way through the thick ice, breaking it into manageable pieces through sheer physical effort. It was brutal, exhausting work, and the blocks produced were irregular in size and shape. Imagine trying to cut through 18 inches of solid ice with an axe. You would chop and chip, sending ice fragments flying, your arms aching with the impact of each blow against the unyielding frozen surface. The progress would be slow, measured in inches per minute, and the effort required would leave you gasping for breath even in the frigid air. But innovation came relatively quickly. Long, two-handled ice saws were developed, allowing workers to cut deep, straight channels through the ice much more efficiently than chopping. These saws were typically 5 or 6 feet long, with large teeth designed to cut through ice without binding. 2 men would work the saw together, one on each end, pulling back and forth in rhythm. The saw would sink down through the ice, creating a clean, straight cut. Once you had cuts on all four sides of a rectangular section, the block could be separated and lifted out. It was still hard work. The saw had to be pulled through the full thickness of the ice repeatedly, but it was vastly more efficient than axes. The saws allowed for uniform blocks, which was important for stacking and storage. They also made the work faster, meaning more ice could be harvested in the limited time available. This technological improvement, simple as it was, helped transform ice cutting from a small-scale activity into a major industry. Fact 4. Industrial innovation. By the mid-19th century, the ice industry had developed even more sophisticated tools. Horse-drawn ice plows were widely used to score the ice into a grid of uniform rectangles, making it much easier and faster to saw out standard-sized blocks. Picture these plows: heavy metal frames with sharp blades that would cut shallow channels into the ice surface, marking out the grid pattern. A horse or team of horses would pull the plow across the frozen lake in parallel lines, then perpendicular lines, creating the checkerboard layout for the day's harvest. The plows didn't cut all the way through the ice. That would be impractical and dangerous, but they cut deep enough that the sawyers knew exactly where to place their saws. The grid was uniform, typically marking out blocks of standard size, perhaps 22 by 32 inches, or whatever dimension the particular operation used. This standardization was crucial for the industry. Standard-sized blocks stacked more efficiently, fit predictably into storage spaces, and could be priced consistently. The uniformity that the plows provided transformed ice from an irregular, natural product into a reliable manufactured commodity. The horses themselves were remarkably sure-footed on the ice, their hooves providing enough traction for pulling the plows. But it wasn't without risk, and occasionally a horse would break through a weak spot, requiring rescue or resulting in tragedy. The animals were valuable, and their loss was both an economic blow and often a source of genuine grief for the workers who depended on them. Fact 5. Moving the blocks. Once blocks were cut free, they needed to be moved to loading points and from there onto transportation. Workers used an array of tools for this: pike poles to push and guide blocks, large iron tongs to grip and lift them, ropes for hauling, and sometimes conveyor systems or slides to move blocks efficiently. The blocks were heavy. A standard block of ice might weigh anywhere from 150 to 300 pounds depending on its size. Moving these efficiently required technique as much as strength. Workers would guide blocks through channels cut in the ice, floating them toward collection points. The water in these channels served as a transport system, allowing heavy blocks to be moved with relatively little effort as long as they stayed in the water. At the loading point, the real work began. Blocks had to be lifted out of the water and onto sleds, wagons, or railroad cars. The iron tongs would bite into the ice, providing a grip point. Teams of men would coordinate their efforts, lifting together on a count, swinging the block up onto the waiting transport. In more advanced operations, conveyor systems used chains and cleats to drag blocks up inclined ramps out of the water. Slides made of wood, kept wet so they froze and became slippery, allowed blocks to be guided down to lower levels or into storage areas with minimal effort. These innovations saved labor and reduced the risk of injury from repeated heavy lifting. Coordination required was considerable. Dozens or even hundreds of workers might be on the ice at once, all moving blocks, sawing new ones, guiding loaded transports to shore, returning empties for another load. It was industrial-scale harvesting, requiring organization and timing to function efficiently. Fact 6. The bitter cold. The working conditions for ice cutters were genuinely brutal. They worked outdoors in extreme cold, often the coldest days of the year when the ice was at its thickest and best for harvesting. The temperature might be well below 0 Fahrenheit, with winds that made it feel even colder, and they worked wet. It was impossible to stay dry when handling ice, breaking through the surface, guiding blocks through water channels. Your clothing would become soaked, and in those temperatures, wet clothing could be deadly. The water would begin to freeze on your garments, creating a shell of ice. Your hands, even in gloves or mittens, would grow numb. Your feet would lose feeling, despite heavy boots. The physical demands were immense. Sawing through ice for hours at a time was exhausting. Lifting and moving heavy blocks wore you down. Your muscles would ache. Your body would cry out for rest. But the work continued because the season was short and the harvest had to be completed. Workers learned strategies. For survival, they moved constantly, never standing still long enough for the cold to penetrate completely. They took breaks in warming shacks where fires burned, places to thaw out for a few minutes before returning to the ice. They ate heartily, consuming calories that their bodies burned rapidly, trying to stay warm. But there was no escaping the fundamental hardship. This was work that broke men down, that aged them prematurely, that left permanent marks in damaged joints and chronic respiratory problems from breathing frigid air for hours on end. Fact 7. Deadly dangers beyond the cold. The work carried serious physical dangers. Men could fall through thin spots in the ice, plunging into freezing water that would kill them in minutes if they weren't quickly rescued. Draft animals faced the same risk, and a horse breaking through often meant the animal would be lost. Workers risked crush injuries from the heavy blocks of ice. A block that slipped while being lifted could fall on a foot or hand, causing broken bones or worse. Blocks could shift in stacks, creating avalanches of ice that could bury or crush anyone in their path. The sharp tools, saws, pike poles, axes could cause terrible injuries if mishandled or if someone slipped on the treacherous surface. The ice itself was unforgiving terrain. It could be smooth and slippery in some areas, rough and treacherous in others. Snow might hide weak spots or irregularities. The constant wetness made everything more hazardous, reducing traction and making tools harder to grip. There are accounts of men falling through and being swept under the solid ice by currents, their bodies not recovered until the spring thaw. Stories of workers crushed between ice blocks and loading equipment. Reports of fingers and toes lost to frostbite, of pneumonia and other illnesses contracted from the combination of cold and wet. The industry accepted these risks as part of the job, but for the workers and their families, each accident was a tragedy. A disabled ice cutter couldn't work, and in an era with no safety net or workers' compensation, injury often meant destitution. Fact 8. Storage and preservation. After cutting, the ice blocks were packed into large ice houses, carefully stacked and insulated to preserve them through the summer months. These ice houses were architectural marvels in their own right, designed to maintain freezing temperatures even in the heat of July and August. The blocks would be stacked with precision, creating solid walls and floors of ice between layers. And around the edges, workers would pack sawdust, straw, or wood shavings materials that provided excellent insulation. A well-constructed ice house, properly filled and insulated, could keep ice frozen for 6 months or more. The physics were simple but effective. Ice melts slowly when insulated from heat. The thick walls of ice in the center of the stack were protected by the outer layers and the insulation, creating a cold core that maintained itself. Some melting occurred, of course, particularly at the edges, but the bulk of the ice remained solid and usable throughout the warm season. These ice houses were substantial structures, often as large as barns, sometimes larger. They dotted the shores of lakes and ponds in ice-producing regions, each representing a significant investment in the infrastructure of preservation. The buildings themselves needed to be maintained, repaired after harsh winters, prepared each year for the new harvest. Inside, the air would be freezing even on the hottest day, creating a strange microclimate. Workers who entered to retrieve ice blocks would feel the shock of temperature change, would see their breath misting, would feel ice crystals forming in their nostrils. It was like stepping into another season, a preserved pocket of winter existing. Out of its proper time. Fact 9. The ice trade. The 19th century ice trade became a major industry, a remarkable example of how human ingenuity could create commerce for natural resources. Ice cutters fed supply chains that shipped ice hundreds or even thousands of miles by rail and ship, transforming frozen water from northern lakes into a valuable commodity. New England became a center of this trade, with ice from ponds and lakes. In Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire, shipped to warm climate cities up and down the eastern seaboard, to the Caribbean, even to India and other distant locations. Ships would carry enormous quantities of ice packed in insulation, racing against melting to deliver their cargo while it was still frozen. The economics could be surprisingly favorable. Ice cost almost nothing to harvest, just labor and tools, and commanded premium prices in warm places where it was scarce. Even with significant losses to melting during transport, the profits could be substantial. This trade created a network of ice houses, shipping facilities, and distribution systems. Ice became a year-round business, even though harvesting was seasonal. Companies managed inventory carefully, calculating how much they needed to harvest in winter to meet summer demand, adjusting for expected losses, trying to avoid the disaster of running out before the next winter's ice could be cut. For the ice cutters themselves, this global trade meant their local labor was connected to markets far away. The block of ice they cut on a January morning in Massachusetts might end up cooling drinks in a Havana cafe or preserving meat on a ship crossing the Atlantic. Fact 10. The end of the harvest, the ice cutter occupation declined rapidly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as artificial ice plants and mechanical refrigeration undercut the economics of harvesting natural ice. Why depend on winter weather and the hard labor of ice cutting when you could manufacture ice year-round in a factory? Artificial ice production removed the seasonal constraint. Ice plants could produce ice whenever it was needed, in whatever quantities were required. The ice was clean and uniform, free from the debris and algae that sometimes contaminated natural ice. And as the technology improved and electricity became more widely available, artificial ice became cheaper than natural ice. Mechanical refrigeration was the final blow. Why buy ice at all when you could have a refrigerator in your home? Or business that maintained cold temperatures continuously without needing to be restocked? The icebox gave way to the refrigerator, and with it went the need for ice delivery, which meant the need for ice cutting disappeared as well. The last large-scale natural ice harvests occurred in the early 20th century. Those small operations persisted in some areas into the 1930s or even later. But as a major occupation, as a seasonal industry that employed thousands, ice cutting was finished by the 1920s. The ice houses fell into disrepair or were repurposed. The lakes that had been scored into grids each winter were left to freeze, naturally unmarked. The tools, the great saws and plows, the tongs and pike poles were retired to museums or rusted away in forgotten corners of old barns. And the ice cutters themselves moved on, finding other work, watching their specialized knowledge become irrelevant. Some adapted to working in ice plants or refrigeration companies, translating their understanding of ice into new contexts. Others left the industry entirely, their years on the frozen lakes becoming stories to tell grandchildren who would never quite understand what it was like. The matchstick dipper, a flame's hidden cost, lets your breathing slow even further now. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed with each exhale. We continue our journey through forgotten work, and in this segment, we enter a Victorian factory, a place of steam and chemical fumes, where workers stood hour after hour creating something we barely think about today, the simple friction match. But the simplicity of striking a match hid a terrible complexity of suffering for those who made them. This is the story of the matchstick dipper, and it is perhaps the darkest of our tales. Close your eyes and let this story wash over you gently. Though the work was hard and the conditions grim, we'll walk through it together calmly, acknowledging what was while holding space for rest. Fact 1. The core process, the matchstick dipper's main task, sounds straightforward enough. Immerse long sticks of wood, held in large frames, into chemical baths to create match heads. But the reality was more complex and more dangerous than this simple description suggests. The process began with wooden splints arranged in frames, thousands of them aligned side by side, their ends extending outward ready for coating. The dipper would lower these frames into molten sulfur first, creating a base coating that would help the match ignite. The sulfur was hot, releasing fumes, but it was the mildest part of the process. Next came the crucial step, dipping into a paste containing white phosphorus mixed with oxidizers like potassium chlorate, antimony sulfide, powdered glass, and various binders. This paste would form the actual match head, the part that would ignite with friction when struck. The white phosphorus was key to making these early friction matches work reliably. The frames held splints that would become two matches. Both ends were coated, and later the sticks would be cut in half, creating two matches from each splint. It was an efficient system designed for mass production, turning raw materials into thousands upon thousands of matches through repetitive dipping motions. The dipper had to work with precision, despite the monotony. The coating needed to be even, not too thick or too thin. The frame needed to be lowered smoothly, held for the right duration, lifted carefully to avoid dripping excess paste. Hour after hour, frame after frame, dip after dip, creating the small fires that would light lamps and stoves in homes across the nation. Fact 2. The scale of production: a single frame could hold about 4,000 splints at a time in some British factories. Think about what this means. One dipping cycle coated 8,000 future match heads, 4,000 matches in a single motion. The dipper's speed and rhythm were critical to the factory's output. A skilled dipper might complete dozens of frames in a single shift, producing hundreds of thousands of matches daily through their individual labor. Multiply this by the number of dippers in a factory, and you begin to understand the industrial scale of match production in the Victorian era. This scale meant efficiency was paramount. The dippers couldn't afford to be slow or careless. Managers watched production numbers, calculated output per worker, pressured everyone to maintain pace. The work became mechanical, repetitive, a physical rhythm that had to be sustained regardless of fatigue or discomfort. The frames themselves were heavy, made heavier by the thousands of wooden splints they held. Lifting them, maneuvering them into and out of the chemical baths required strength that had to be maintained throughout impossibly long shifts. Your arms would ache, your shoulders would burn, but the frames kept coming. The production had to continue, and always, with each dip, with each frame processed, the workers were exposed to the chemicals that would eventually poison them. The paste containing white phosphorus was deadly, though its effects were gradual enough that workers might not understand the danger until it was too late. Fact 3. The endless shifts: dippers typically worked very long shifts, often up to 14 hours a day. Imagine standing for 14 hours, performing the same motions repeatedly in rooms that were poorly ventilated, over trays of phosphorus solution that were kept warm or steam heated to maintain the proper consistency of the paste. 14 hours is more than half a waking day. You would arrive at the factory in darkness during winter months and leave in darkness. Your entire life would be structured around these shifts, with barely enough time for sleep and basic necessities. Before returning to the factory floor, the rooms were kept warm because the phosphorus paste needed to stay at certain temperatures to work properly. Combined with poor ventilation, often deliberately limited because ventilation could cool the paste, this created oppressive conditions. The air was thick with chemical fumes, warm and heavy, difficult to breathe. And throughout these 14-hour shifts, the dippers were constantly inhaling toxic fumes from the phosphorus. With every breath, they were taking poison into their bodies. The white phosphorus produced vapors that were odorless but deadly, accumulating in their systems, working its slow destruction on their bones and tissues. The physical exhaustion combined with the toxic exposure created a punishing environment. Workers would grow dizzy, would feel headaches, would experience nausea, but they couldn't stop, couldn't leave. The shift had to be completed, the production maintained, regardless of how they felt. Fact 4. Eating poison in many factories. There was no separate dining space. Workers, including dippers, ate their meals at their workbenches surrounded by phosphorus dust and vapors. This simple fact multiplied the danger immensely. Imagine trying to eat your lunch in an atmosphere contaminated with toxic chemicals. Every surface is dusted with phosphorus compounds. Your hands, no matter how carefully you try to clean them, carry traces of the paste. The air itself contains particles of the chemical. When you bring food to your mouth, you're inevitably ingesting some of the poison. This wasn't ignorance. Factory owners knew about this practice. But providing separate, clean dining areas would have cost money and reduced productive space. It was easier and more profitable to let workers eat where they worked, even though this dramatically increased their exposure to the chemicals that were slowly killing them. The workers themselves often had little choice in the matter. They needed the job, needed the wages, however meager. Complaining about conditions might mean dismissal, and there were always others desperate enough to take their place. So they ate their bread and cheese surrounded by poison, swallowing not just food, but also the substance that would eventually destroy their jaws and their lives. This detail eating it contaminated workbenches captures something essential about industrial conditions in this era. The complete disregard for worker well-being, the prioritization of profit over health, the way workers were treated as expendable components in a manufacturing process rather than as human beings deserving of basic dignity and safety. Fact 5. Phossy jaw matchstick dippers were among the workers most likely to develop phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, a condition that became known simply as phossy jaw. This was a disfiguring and often fatal disease that announced itself first with toothache and gum swelling, symptoms that might seem minor, but were actually the beginning of something terrible. The disease progressed remorselessly. The gums would continue to swell and become inflamed. Abscesses would form, painful pockets of infection. The bone of the jaw itself would begin to die, a process called necrosis, where the tissue literally decayed while the person was still alive. The dead bone would become visible through wounds in the gums that wouldn't heal in advanced cases. Portions of the jaw would have to be removed surgically, leaving workers terribly disfigured. Some lost their entire lower jaw. The pain was excruciating. The smell from the necrotic tissue was nauseating. And many victims eventually died from the disease, either from the spread of infection throughout their bodies or from the complications of jawbone removal. This wasn't a rare condition among match workers. It was common enough to become the emblematic industrial disease of the profession, so strongly associated with match dipping that the connection was undeniable even to those who might have preferred to ignore it. Picture a young person, perhaps a teenager, taking a job as a matchstick dipper. Within a few years, they might begin experiencing that first toothache. They would know what it meant, would have seen it happen to others, and they would face the terrible choice of continuing to work and certainly making it worse, or leaving the job and losing their income. Fact 6. Medical recognition fussy jaw became so closely tied to matchwork that it was widely discussed by doctors and reformers throughout the 19th century as evidence of the dangers of white phosphorus manufacture. Medical reports from the 1840s onward documented the link between dipping work and this horrific disease. Doctors wrote papers describing the condition, its progression, its effects. They examined workers and cataloged symptoms. They performed surgeries attempting to save lives by removing diseased bone. They testified about what they had seen, providing medical expertise to support calls for reform. The medical community understood the cause and effect clearly. Working with white phosphorus caused this disease. The mechanism was understood. The phosphorus accumulated in the body, particularly in areas of bone injury or dental problems, and triggered necrosis. The solution was obvious. Stop using white phosphorus, or at least dramatically improve protection for workers. But understanding the problem didn't lead to quick solutions. Economic pressures and the low cost of white phosphorus meant that many factory owners resisted change. White phosphorus made excellent matches that ignited easily and reliably. Alternative chemicals were more expensive or produced inferior products. Changing processes would require investment. So despite clear medical evidence, despite documentation of suffering and death, despite the obvious connection between this chemical and this disease, the industry continued largely as it had been. Profits trumped health. Convenience trumped safety. Workers continued to dip frames into poisonous paste, continued to breathe toxic fumes, continued to develop fussy jaw and die from it. Fact 7. Inadequate protection. Some factory owners, more enlightened or perhaps more fearful of liability, tried crude protective measures. Dippers might be required to rinse in alkaline water after their shifts, the theory being that alkaline solutions would neutralize phosphorus. Some were told to wear sponges over their mouths, sometimes soaked in alkaline solution, to filter or neutralize the fumes they breathed. These measures were better than nothing, but only barely. The alkaline rinses might remove some surface phosphorus from skin, but they did nothing about the poison already inhaled and absorbed during the shift. The sponges were uncomfortable and made breathing more difficult, and many workers would remove them when supervisors were watching. And even when worn properly, they provided limited protection against vapors that permeated the entire factory atmosphere. The inconsistency of these measures made them even less effective. Some factories implemented protection sporadically. Some supervisors enforced them strictly, while others ignored compliance. Workers might use protective measures one day and not the next, depending on who was watching or how uncomfortable they found them. And fundamentally, these were attempts to make a dangerous process slightly less dangerous, rather than addressing the root problem, the use of a deadly chemical in conditions where workers had no real protection. It was like putting a small bandage on a deep wound, a gesture toward care that didn't actually prevent the harm. The workers themselves often understood how inadequate these measures were. They could still smell the phosphorus, could still feel its effects, could still see their coworkers developing fussy jaw despite the rinses and sponges. But they had little power to demand better, and the alternative to working in these conditions was often unemployment and destitution. Fact 8. The Match Girls' Strike. The situation reached a crisis point at the notorious Bryant and May factory in Bow, London, which employed many matchstick dippers. In 1888, these workers, mostly young women and girls, went on strike to protest their conditions. This became known as the Match Girls' Strike, and it pushed match manufacture and the dippers' role into public view in ways that factory owners had long tried to avoid. The strikers had multiple grievances. Wages were painfully low, barely enough to survive on. Workers faced punitive fines for minor infractions, deducted from their meager pay. And most importantly, They were suffering health damage from phosphorus exposure, developing phossy jaw and other ailments, with no compensation or protection. The strike captured public attention in ways that medical reports and reformers' writings had not. Here were real people, mostly young women, standing up against powerful factory owners and demanding basic fairness. Newspapers covered the strike extensively. Public sympathy largely sided with the workers. The human cost of cheap matches suddenly became visible and undeniable. The strike succeeded in winning some concessions and, more importantly, in changing public perception. It became harder for the industry to ignore the suffering of match workers when that suffering had been so publicly documented. The Match Girls' strike became a landmark moment in labor activism, inspiring other workers and demonstrating the power of collective action. For the dippers themselves, the strike represented a moment of dignity and agency in lives otherwise defined by exploitation. They had spoken up, stood together, and made their voices heard. Even though many would continue to suffer from the effects of phosphorus exposure, they had fought back, and that mattered. Fact 9. The path to change came through multiple channels. Public campaigns raised awareness about the dangers of white phosphorus. Legislation began to restrict its use. Alternative technologies, particularly red phosphorus safety matches, proved that matches could be made without the deadly chemical. Improved ventilation systems, when finally implemented, reduced exposure for workers who remained in the industry. Mechanization and automation also played a role. As machines were developed, they could apply match heads without human dippers standing over toxic paste all day. The traditional hand-dipping role became obsolete. Machine operators still worked with chemicals, but with better ventilation and less direct exposure than the old dippers had endured. The transition wasn't instant. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some factories continued using white phosphorus and employing dippers, while others adopted safer methods. Gradually, inexorably, the safer processes spread. The economic advantages of mechanization combined with social pressure to eliminate the worst. Industrial poisons. International agreements eventually banned or severely restricted white phosphorus in match manufacture. By the early 20th century, the use of this chemical had largely ceased in countries with strong regulatory frameworks. The matches we use today are fundamentally different products, made through different processes, by workers who face different though not absent risks. Fact 10. The vanishing of the dipper. By the early 20th century, the traditional matchstick dipper had largely vanished as a distinct occupation. The job title disappeared from factory records and employment listings. The specialized skill of hand-dipping frames into chemical baths became obsolete, remembered only by those who had done it or witnessed it. The dippers themselves scattered into other occupations. Some found work in factories that had converted to safer matchmaking processes, becoming machine operators rather than hand dippers. Others left manufacturing entirely, taking whatever work they could find. Some were too damaged by their years of phosphorus exposure to work at all, suffering from phossy jaw or other chronic health problems caused by the poison they had absorbed. The disappearance of this occupation represents progress in multiple senses. It meant fewer people being poisoned in the name of cheap matches. It meant the triumph of reform movements that had fought for decades to end this particular form of industrial suffering. It meant that technological advancement, for once, improved, rather than merely changed working conditions. But we should remember that this progress came too late for thousands of workers who had already been poisoned, who had already lost their jaws or their lives. The matchstick dippers paid the price for the convenience of friction matches, and that price was extracted in pain and disfigurement and death. Today, we strike a match without thinking about its history. The flame appears instantly, serves its purpose, and is extinguished. We don't consider the industrial processes that made it, And we certainly don't think about the workers who once stood for 14 hours a day dipping frames into deadly chemicals so that we might have light and fire on demand. But perhaps occasionally we should remember the matchstick dippers who suffered so we might have convenience. Remember that progress is not inevitable, that worker safety was won through struggle and activism and reform, not granted by benevolent owners. Remember that behind every common object lies a history, and sometimes that history is marked by suffering that should not be forgotten. The Leech Collector, harvesting from the marsh, let yourself sink deeper into rest now. Your breathing is slow and steady, your body heavy and relaxed. We continue our journey through forgotten work, and in this segment we step away from factories and city streets, away from the noise of industry, and wade instead into the quiet waters of marshes and bogs. Here, in these still, dark pools, we meet the leech collectors, who gathered living creatures for medical use. Their work is strange, as it was essential in its time. Close your eyes and let this story unfold gently. We're entering the natural world now, away from machines and smoke, into places of water and stillness, where an unusual harvest was gathered by those with few other options for earning their bread. Fact 1. The medical purpose leech collectors existed to supply a specific medical need, leeches for bloodletting. In the 18th and 19th centuries, bloodletting was a dominant medical treatment, used for an enormous range of ailments. Fevers, inflammations, headaches, congestion, mental disturbances. Nearly any condition might be treated by removing blood from the patient. The theory behind this practice was ancient, rooted in the concept of balancing bodily humors. Physicians believed that illness resulted from imbalances in these humors, and that removing blood could restore proper balance and health. By modern standards, this seems misguided, even harmful, but it was mainstream medicine for centuries. Practiced by the most respected doctors and taught in the finest medical schools, leeches were preferred for certain types of bloodletting because they could be applied precisely to specific areas of the body. They would attach themselves, pierce the skin with tiny teeth arranged in 3 radiating rows, and drink until engorged, typically consuming several times their own weight in blood before dropping off naturally. The leeches left behind a Y-shaped wound that would continue bleeding for hours after the leech detached, further contributing to the blood loss the doctor intended. This controlled, localized bleeding was considered therapeutic, and millions upon millions of leeches were used annually across Europe and beyond. For the leech collectors, this medical fashion created steady demand for their unusual harvest. They waded into marshes, not to gather plants or catch fish, but to collect these small blood-sucking creatures that doctors and apothecaries would pay for. Fact 2. The scale of demand, the demand for medicinal leeches was truly staggering. In 1832, France reportedly imported more than 50 million medicinal leeches in a single year. 50 million living creatures, each one caught by someone who had to locate it, allow it to attach, remove it carefully, and transport it alive to market. This single statistic helps us understand that leech collecting was not some marginal curiosity, but a sizable trade. Thousands of people across Europe must have been involved in gathering leeches to supply such enormous numbers. The creatures were caught locally and also imported from countries where they were more abundant, creating an international commerce in blood-sucking worms. Think about what this scale meant for the leeches themselves. Their populations in many European waters were harvested so intensively that the medicinal leech became scarce in regions where it had once been common. Collectors had to range further, wade deeper into more remote marshes to find sufficient numbers. For the collectors, high demand meant the work was available, that there was a market for what they could supply. But it also meant competition, meant others were searching the same marshes, meant that prime leech habitats became crowded with gatherers all seeking the same valuable creatures. The trade created a whole infrastructure. Middlemen who bought. From collectors and sold to pharmacists. Shipping networks to move leeches long distances while keeping them alive. Storage facilities where leeches could be maintained until needed. It was an entire economy built around these small creatures and the medical practices that demanded them. Fact 3. The habitats collectors worked in bogs, marshes, and stagnant ponds, places where medicinal leeches were naturally abundant. These are liminal environments, neither fully land nor fully water, where the ground is soft and uncertain beneath your feet, where vegetation grows thick and tangled, where the water is dark and you cannot see what moves beneath its surface. Picture these places. They are quiet except for the sounds of water birds, insects, and the subtle movements of hidden life. The air is thick with moisture and the smell of decomposing vegetation. The water is brown or black with tannins, cold even in summer, and still except where your movement disturbs it. These are not pleasant places to work. The ground gives way unexpectedly, soft mud pulling at your feet with each step. Reeds and water plants catch at your legs. The bottom is uneven, sometimes shallow enough to wade, sometimes dropping into deeper pools without warning. And always, there is the uncertainty of what else might be living in these waters alongside the leeches you seek. But this is where the leeches lived, and so this is where the collectors had to go. They couldn't harvest from dry land or clear streams. They had to enter these marginal spaces, these places where most people preferred not to venture, and spend hours searching for creatures that most people found repulsive. The work required a kind of acceptance, a willingness to be in uncomfortable places, to wade through water that others avoided, to interact with creatures that others shuddered at. The collectors developed an intimacy with these marshlands that few others possessed, learning to read the water, to know where leeches were most likely to be found. Fact 4. The method, the most common collection method, was both simple and deeply unpleasant. Wade bare-legged through shallow water and let the leeches attach to your own skin. Once they had latched on and begun feeding, you would pull them off and place them in a container to be sold. Imagine doing this deliberately, methodically. You roll up your trousers or lift your skirts and step into the cold, murky water. You wade slowly through the marsh, disturbing the vegetation, creating movement that attracts leeches. And then you feel it, the first touch of a leech against your skin, surprisingly firm. As it finds a spot and begins to attach, you let it happen. You don't flinch away, but allow the creature to settle, to pierce your skin with its tiny teeth, to begin drawing your blood. You might feel a slight pinch, or you might feel nothing at all. Leeches secrete an anesthetic as they bite. You wait until the leech is firmly attached, feeding steadily, and then you carefully remove it, placing it in your basket or bucket with the others you've already collected. Then you continue waiting, and the process repeats. Another leech finds. You attaches, feeds. You remove it and add it to your collection. Hours pass this way, in the cold water, feeling the repeated bites, watching your legs become covered in the eye-shaped wounds where leeches have been removed. This was not work. For the squeamish, it required suppressing natural revulsion, accepting discomfort, and the steady loss of your own blood as simply the cost of the trade. The leeches had to be collected somehow, and this method, using your own body as bait, was efficient if deeply unpleasant. Fact 5. Alternative methods. Some collectors used animals instead of themselves, often old horses or livestock that were driven into swampy water, so leeches would fasten to the animal's legs. The collector would then pick the engorged leeches off the animal's skin by hand. This method had obvious advantages. The collector's own blood was spared, and a horse's legs provided more surface area than human legs, potentially attracting more leeches at once. But it also required owning or having access to an animal, which not all collectors could manage. And it required the animal to cooperate, to stand still in uncomfortable water, while leeches attached and fed Dot, picture an old farm horse, no longer. Strong enough for heavy work, being led into a marsh and made to stand while leeches clustered on its legs. The horse might shift nervously, uncomfortable with the sensation, requiring the handler to calm and steady it. Once enough leeches had attached, the horse would be let out and the collector would work around its legs, pulling off the creatures one by one. This was kinder to the collector, but perhaps not to the horse, which had no choice in the matter, and no understanding of why it was being subjected to this treatment. It was a practical solution to the problem of harvesting leeches if you had the resources to employ it. Fact 6. Tools and techniques. Leech gatherers sometimes carried simple tools to help in their work. A peeled willow wand or similar stick could be used to stir weeds and mud, flushing leeches out from hiding spots so they would either latch onto the wand itself or onto the collector's legs. The technique was to move the stick slowly through the vegetation and bottom mud, creating disturbance that attracted the leech's attention. They are drawn to movement and warmth, sensing potential hosts, and would emerge from the sediment or vegetation where they'd been resting to investigate the disturbance. A skilled collector learned to read the environment, to know which areas of a marsh were most productive, which types of vegetation provided the best habitat, what time of day the leeches were most active. This knowledge, accumulated through experience, made the difference between a successful day's work and hours of fruitless waiting. The stick also provided some assistance in moving through the marsh, testing the depth and firmness of the bottom before committing weight to a step. In these uncertain environments, where a solid-looking surface might conceal deep mud or a sudden drop, such prudence could prevent falls or becoming stuck. Fact 7. A successful day's work was reported as collecting up to about 500 leeches, which were then sold to middlemen, pharmacists, or physicians. 500 creatures, each one located, each one allowed to attach or picked from an animal's leg, each one carefully placed in the collection container. The work was tedious and repetitive, requiring patience and persistence. You couldn't rush it. The leeches attached when they attached, fed at their own pace, had to be found one by one in waters where they were well camouflaged against the dark, mud, and vegetation. The payment for this work was generally quite modest. Leeches sold for a few pence per dozen, meaning a day's collection of 500 might earn the gatherer a couple of shillings, at most barely enough to live on. Certainly not enough to lift anyone out of poverty. The collectors worked long, hours from dawn to dusk during the warmer months when leeches were most active, trying to gather enough to make the work worthwhile. In winter, when leeches became dormant and the water was painfully cold, the work became nearly impossible, leaving the collectors to find other means of survival during those lean months. The job required standing for long periods in cold, stagnant water, leaving workers exposed to fatigue, chills, and various ailments. The constant cold and damp led to joint problems, respiratory issues, and general poor health. The work wore people down, aged them prematurely, left them weakened and vulnerable to disease. Fact 8. Health hazards, the health risks of leech. Collecting extended beyond the general discomfort of working in cold water. Chronic blood loss from repeated leech bites could weaken collectors over time. A single leech might take a tablespoon or more of blood, and if you were using your own legs as collection sites, you might have dozens attached during a day's work. That cumulative blood loss, repeated daily throughout the season, could lead to anemia and general debilitation. Infections transmitted through leech bites were a known occupational hazard. The wounds left by leeches, small though they were, provided entry points for bacteria present in the stagnant water. These infections could range from minor skin irritations to serious, systemic illnesses that might prove fatal in an era before antibiotics. The collectors often showed signs of chronic poor health, pale skin from anemia, coughs and respiratory, problems from constant exposure to cold and damp, skin conditions from infections, joint pain from standing in cold water for hours. Their bodies bore the accumulated cost of their work, visible evidence of what the occupation demanded, and unlike some dangerous occupations that offered higher pay to compensate for risk, leech collecting was both hazardous and poorly compensated. The collectors suffered for minimal reward, driven to this work by poverty rather than attracted to it by adequate payment. Fact 9. Social status and demographics. Leech collecting was generally described as unpleasant, poorly paid work associated with the rural poor, often women who had few other ways to earn money. It was not considered respectable employment, and those who did it occupied the lowest rungs of the economic ladder. Women were particularly prominent among leech collectors, perhaps because the work, while unpleasant, didn't require the physical strength demanded by many other forms of labor available to the poor. A woman could wade into a marsh and allow leeches to attach as easily as a man could, and the meager pay was better than no pay at all. For many of these women, leech collecting was one option among a very limited set, perhaps seasonal agricultural work, perhaps domestic service in a wealthy home, perhaps begging. The work was degrading and uncomfortable, but it provided some independence, some small income that was their own, earned through their own efforts, even if those efforts were deeply unpleasant. The social stigma attached to the work reflected broader attitudes toward those who did it. They were poor, they worked in dirty conditions, they handled creatures that most people found disgusting. They occupied a marginal space in both geography and society. The work marked them as desperate, as people with no better options, and this marking persisted even when they weren't actually in the marshes. Yet there was also a kind of knowledge and skill involved that shouldn't be dismissed. The collectors understood leech behavior, knew the creatures' habitats intimately, had developed techniques and strategies that made them effective at what they did. This expertise simply wasn't valued or respected by a society that looked down on both the workers and the work they performed. Fact 10. The leech collector's occupation declined in the later 19th century as medical opinion gradually shifted away from bloodletting as a standard treatment. The change wasn't sudden. Old medical practices die, hard but slowly. Doctors began to question whether removing blood actually helped patients or harmed them. New medical theories emerged, based on improved understanding of physiology and disease. The germ theory of disease provided alternative explanations for illness that didn't involve balancing humors. Clinical observation began to suggest that patients who weren't bled actually recovered better than those who were. The scientific revolution that had transformed other fields gradually reached medicine, bringing with it a more skeptical, evidence-based approach. As bloodletting fell out of favor, demand for leeches plummeted. The enormous trade that had existed, those 50 million leeches imported into France in a single year, dwindled to a fraction of its former size. Collectors found fewer buyers for their harvest, received lower prices when they did sell, eventually couldn't make the work economically viable at all. The occupation faded away, leaving the leeches to recover their populations in the marshes, and the collectors to find other work or other means of survival. Some perhaps felt relief at leaving behind such uncomfortable labor. Others may have mourned the loss of income, however modest it had been. Today, leeches have returned to medical use in very specific applications, helping restore blood flow in reattached fingers or transplanted tissue, but the numbers used are tiny compared to the historical trade. And they're supplied by commercial breeding facilities, not by people wading into marshes. The leech collector has joined the long list of obsolete occupations, remembered now only in historical records and the occasional academic study. The marshes, where they worked, are still there, quieter now. The leeches undisturbed, except by the natural rhythms of predator and prey. no longer harvested to feed the demands of questionable medicine. The Plague Doctor. Walking among the dying, let your body relax completely now, releasing any remaining tension. Your breathing is slow and peaceful. We continue our journey through forgotten occupations, and in this segment, we encounter perhaps the most haunting figure in medical history, the Plague Doctor, with their distinctive beaked mask and long dark cloak, moving through streets where death walked openly. This is a story of courage and futility, of people who tried to fight an enemy they couldn't understand with tools that couldn't help. Close your eyes and let this unfold gently, like a distant memory from centuries past, something that happened long ago and far away, something that can't touch you now in your safety and comfort. Fact 1. The contract plague doctors were not volunteers driven by pure altruism or calling. They were formally hired by towns or state authorities underwritten. Contracts, legal documents that spelled out their duties, compensation, and terms of service during plague outbreaks. These contracts often specified fixed salaries and sometimes included bonuses or death benefits for their families, an acknowledgement of the very real possibility that the doctor would not survive their employment. Think about what it meant to sign such a contract. You were agreeing to stay in a city that others were fleeing, to enter homes where the sick lay dying, to expose yourself daily to a disease that killed with terrifying speed and efficiency. The salary had to be substantial enough to make this risk seem worthwhile, and the promise of provision for your family if you died was both a comfort and a grim reminder of the danger. These contracts created a formal relationship between the doctor and the civic authority. The doctor became an official, a public servant with defined responsibilities. This wasn't a private physician choosing which patients to see and which to refuse, but a state employee obligated to serve according to the terms of their agreement. Contracts were specific about duration, usually for the length of the outbreak, however long that might be, and about compensation. Some doctors negotiated considerable sums, understanding their value increased dramatically when no one else would do the work. Others, perhaps more desperate or less skilled at negotiation, accepted whatever was offered. Reading these contracts today, we see the stark calculus of plague economics. How much would it take to convince someone to walk among the dying? The answer varied, but the question itself reveals the terrible reality of epidemic disease in an era that had no effective response to it. Fact 2. Universal care. The contracts usually required plague doctors to treat even the poorest residents who could not pay, which tied the role to public welfare rather than private practice. This made them an early, crude form of state-employed public health worker, centuries before such a concept would be formally developed and institutionalized. In normal times, medical care was largely a private transaction. Physicians treated those who could afford their fees, and the poor relied on charity, folk remedies, or simply suffered without professional help. But plague disrupted this arrangement. A disease that spread from house to house, that could move from the slums to the mansions, could not be addressed through private medicine alone. By requiring plague doctors to treat everyone regardless of ability to pay. Authorities recognized, perhaps unconsciously, that epidemic disease was a collective problem requiring a collective response. The plague doctor entering a poor household wasn't practicing charity. They were fulfilling their contractual obligation to serve the public good. This universality of care, forced by circumstances and enshrined in contracts, represented a fundamental shift in thinking about medicine and public responsibility. It acknowledged that the health of the poorest residents affected everyone, that disease didn't respect social boundaries, that protecting the community required treating all its members. Plague doctor moving through the city, visiting rich and poor alike, became a symbol of this shared vulnerability. In the face of plague, social distinctions mattered less than the simple fact of human susceptibility to disease. Fact 3. who they were, because established physicians frequently fled epidemic cities, quite sensibly, from a personal survival. Standpoint plague doctors were often inexperienced practitioners, failed doctors, or even men with no formal medical education, who were simply willing to take the risk. This raises uncomfortable questions about the quality of care provided during the very times when expert medical help was most desperately needed. Picture the situation. Plague arrives in a city. Cases begin appearing. Fear spreads. The established doctors, the respected physicians who treated the wealthy and held positions at universities, begin to leave. They have the resources to flee to country estates or distant relatives, and they have families to protect. Their departure is understandable, but leaves a void. Who fills that void? Sometimes younger doctors hoping to establish reputations, willing to gamble their lives for the chance of prominence and a substantial pay. Sometimes older physicians who had never quite succeeded in competitive urban markets, seeing an opportunity for income they couldn't obtain otherwise. Sometimes men who had failed as doctors, whose practices had foundered, who saw plague service as a last resort. And sometimes, most troublingly, people with no real medical training at all, who simply claimed enough knowledge to be hired in. Desperate circumstances. When the need is urgent and the supply of willing practitioners nearly non-existent, standards drop and authorities hire whoever will accept the position. This meant that plague victims, at their most vulnerable, were often treated by the least qualified medical practitioners. The care provided might be not just ineffective, but actively harmful, administered by people who didn't fully understand even the flawed medical theories of their time. Fact 4. The bureaucrat physician, muck of the plague doctor's work was administrative, rather than therapeutic. They recorded infections and deaths, compiled mortality lists, and kept casebooks that later helped authorities track the spread and severity of outbreaks. In some ways, they were data collectors as much as healers, documenting the progression of a disease they couldn't stop. Imagine your day as a plague doctor. You visit houses where plague is reported, examine the sick and often the newly dead, and sit down to record what you've seen. Name, address, symptoms observed, date of illness onset, date of death, if applicable. The casebooks grow thick with these entries, a grim ledger of suffering and loss. These records serve practical purposes. Authorities use them to identify patterns, to understand where plague was spreading most rapidly, to allocate resources for burial and quarantine. The mortality lists were posted publicly, allowing residents to track the epidemic's progress, though such knowledge must have brought more despair than comfort when the numbers climbed inexorably higher. The plague doctor became a witness, an official recorder of catastrophe. Their documentation created a historical archive that we can still read today, understanding past epidemics through the notes they left behind. They captured not just numbers, but sometimes descriptions how the disease manifested, how quickly it progressed, details that contribute to our modern understanding of plague's historical impact. This administrative role transformed the plague doctor from pure medical practitioner into something more complex. Part clinician, part bureaucrat, part historian, documenting disaster, even as they tried futilely to combat it. Fact 5. Legal duties. Plague doctors also performed non-medical legal tasks such as witnessing wills, attesting to last testaments at the bedside, and sometimes supervising or certifying burials. This made the job a hybrid of physician, clerk, and notary, a unique combination of roles necessitated by the social chaos of epidemic. When plague struck a household, normal legal processes broke down. Notaries and lawyers wouldn't enter infected houses, but wills needed to be witnessed, especially when wealthy families were dying and property inheritance was at stake. The plague doctor, already exposed by their work, was the obvious choice to provide this legal service. Picture the scene. A dying merchant, knowing the end is near, wanting to ensure his property is distributed according to his wishes. His regular lawyer has fled the city or refuses to come. The plague doctor arrives, ostensibly to treat the man, but in practice simply to witness his suffering and record his death. While there, the doctor performs the legal function of witnessing the man's dictated will, lending official weight to his last wishes. Similarly, burials during plague time required official oversight. Bodies needed to be accounted for, burial sites properly documented, fees collected where applicable. The plague doctor might supervise these burials, ensuring that civic regulations were followed, even in the midst of chaos. These additional duties reflected the plague doctor's unique position. They were the only officials who regularly moved between the world of the dying and the functioning civic apparatus. They became intermediaries, connecting the plague-stricken households to the legal and administrative systems that continued operating beyond the epidemic's immediate reach. Fact 6. The autopsy room in some Italian cities. Plague doctors were ordered to conduct autopsies to study internal lesions, a practice that contributed to early pathological observation, even though it did not yet lead to effective treatment. This was dangerous. Meticulous work performed in the hope of understanding a disease that remained fundamentally mysterious. The autopsy of a plague victim must have been a harrowing experience. The body would show the characteristic signs: the swollen, blackened buboes in groin and armpits, evidence of internal bleeding, the organs damaged by systemic infection. The plague doctor would open the body cavity, examine the organs, note the unusual lesions and hemorrhages, record their observations. What were they looking for? In the framework of humoral theory, they sought evidence of imbalanced humors, excess of black bile perhaps, or other signs that would confirm their understanding of how disease worked. They didn't find what we now know to be there, the bacteria. Yersinia pestis multiplying in lymph nodes and bloodstream, because they had no concept of microorganisms as agents of disease. Yet this work wasn't worthless. The careful observation and documentation of pathological changes, even when misinterpreted, built a foundation of anatomical knowledge. The plague doctors were learning what plague did to the human body, even if they misunderstood why it did. Those things the courage required for this work shouldn't be underestimated. To open a plague corpse, to handle infected tissue, to spend extended time in close contact with a body full of deadly bacteria, this was extraordinarily risky, even by the standards of plague doctoring. These practitioners sacrificed themselves for knowledge that wouldn't bear fruit until long after their deaths. Fact 7. Feudal treatments. The treatments plague doctors offered were rooted in humoral theory. They bled patients, lanced and drained. Buboes applied leeches or frogs to draw out supposed toxins, and prescribed emetics and diuretics to rebalance the 4 bodily humors. These treatments were painful and largely ineffective, sometimes hastening death rather than preventing it. Humoral theory held that health depended on balance among 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disease resulted from imbalance, and treatment aimed to restore proper proportion. For plague, which was seen as an excess of black bile and corrupted blood, the logical treatment was bloodletting and purging so the plague doctor would open a vein and drain blood from an already weakened patient, or would lance the swollen, painful buboes to release the infected material within. They would apply leeches to draw more blood, or place live frogs on the buboes in the belief that the frogs would draw out poison. They would administer powerful emetics to induce vomiting or purgatives to cause diarrhea, further weakening patients who desperately needed rest and fluids. These treatments caused suffering without providing benefit. A patient treated by a plague doctor might actually fare worse than one left alone, though no one realized this at the time. The medical theory seemed logical within its own framework, and the doctors administered treatments in good faith, believing they were helping. The tragedy lies not in malice, but in ignorance skilled, practitioners working diligently according to fundamentally flawed theories, causing harm while trying to heal, unable to recognize that their interventions were counterproductive because they had no way to test their assumptions or compare outcomes systematically. Fact 8. Spiritual remedies. Many plague doctors also recommended or administered superstitious or spiritual remedies, herbal charms, prayers, amulets, and various talismans, reflecting the belief that plague could have astrological, divine, or moral causes rather than microbial ones. Medicine and magic blurred together in their practice, both deployed against an enemy that seemed beyond natural understanding. The thinking went like this: if plague was sent by God as punishment for sin, then prayer and repentance might ward it off. If it resulted from malign astrological conjunctions, then amulets prepared at favorable celestial moments might protect the wearer. If it was caused by miasma-corrupted air, then aromatic herbs might purify one's immediate atmosphere. A plague doctor might prescribe not just bloodletting, but also specific prayers to be recited. They might provide amulets containing herbs, or written charms, objects believed to have protective power. They might recommend confession and penance alongside medical treatments, addressing the spiritual dimension of disease as seriously as the physical dot. This mixing of medicine and superstition seemed strange to modern eyes, but it reflected a worldview where natural and supernatural causes existed on a continuum. Disease could have multiple causes operating simultaneously, requiring multiple types of intervention. The plague doctor who offered both bloodletting and blessed amulets wasn't being inconsistent, but comprehensive, addressing the patient's condition from all possible angles. That none of it worked, that patients died despite bloodletting, prayers, and charms didn't necessarily disprove the theories. Individual cases could always be explained away. The prayer wasn't sincere enough. The astrological timing was slightly off. The patient's sins were too great for redemption. The framework persisted because it was unfalsifiable, capable of incorporating any outcome without being fundamentally challenged. Fact 9. The beaked costume. The iconic beaked costume, probably standardized in the 17th century, consisted of a long waxed cloak, leather gloves and boots, and a bird-like mask whose beak was packed with aromatic herbs. It was meant to filter miasma-bad air rather than stop contagion in the modern sense, but it accidentally provided some protection through creating a physical barrier between doctor and patient. Picture this costume: the long cloak, often dark-colored, treated with wax to create a smooth surface that liquids and particles might slide off. The gloves and boots providing full coverage of hands and feet. And most strikingly, the mask with its long beak, giving the wearer an unsettling bird-like appearance. The beak served a specific purpose in miasma theory. It was stuffed with aromatic substances, herbs, flowers, spices, believed to purify the air before the doctor breathed it. Rosemary, cloves, camphor, myrrh, these pleasant-smelling materials were thought to neutralize the corrupted air that supposedly carried plague. The costume was designed around a misunderstanding of disease transmission, but it nonetheless provided real protection. A barrier between doctor and patient, limited contact with infected bodily fluids. The mask, while not an effective respirator by modern standards, still reduced the inhalation of droplets. The waxed cloak could be cleaned more easily than regular fabric. The costume worked, just not for the reasons its designers believed. The psychological impact of this costume was significant. Imagine seeing this figure approaching, the long dark cloak, the strange beaked mask, the staff in hand. It was terrifying, otherworldly, more like a supernatural harbinger of death than a healer. For plague victims, the doctor's arrival confirmed their worst fears, visually reinforcing that they were now among the dying. Fact 10. The stick and distance plague doctors carried a stick or cane to examine patients and bodies at arm's length, and to keep desperate crowds away. This was an early but theory-driven attempt at physical distancing well before the germ theory of disease existed. The stick became both a medical instrument and a means of maintaining boundaries between the doctor and the terrified, dying populace. The stick served multiple functions. It could be used to lift a patient's clothing to examine buboes without touching the fabric. It could point to symptoms or areas of concern during examination. It could be used to check whether a fallen body was truly dead without the doctor needing to lean close or touch the corpse directly. But perhaps most importantly, the stick was a tool for managing crowds. During plague outbreaks, people became desperate, frantic for help, or simply crazed with fear. They might mob the plague doctor, begging for treatment, demanding attention for their sick relatives, or simply seeking reassurance that they would be spared. The stick allowed the doctor to maintain distance, to push back when pressed too closely, to create the space needed to move safely through dangerous streets. This physical distancing was motivated by miasma. Theory staying at arm's length meant less exposure to the patient's corrupted air, but it served the same function that modern infection control practices do, reducing the transmission of disease through proximity. The plague doctor didn't understand bacteria or viral spread, but they understood intuitively that closeness to the sick was dangerous, and they tried to minimize it. The image of the plague doctor with their long stick, keeping the world at bay, captures something essential about the role. Isolated by their work, separated from both the healthy and the sick by the nature of what they did, walking a lonely path through devastated cities where their presence brought both hope and dread. The human computer, calculating the stars. Let yourself sink even deeper into rest now. Your mind is quiet, your body completely relaxed. We continue our journey through forgotten occupations, and in this final segment, we leave behind the marshes and factories, the streets and tunnels, and enter instead a place of precision and patience, the astronomical observatory. Here, in rooms filled with glass plates and measuring instruments, we meet the human computers who transformed raw observations into knowledge of the cosmos through countless hours of meticulous calculation. Close your eyes and imagine a quiet room, evening light fading through tall windows, rows of desks where figures bend over their work, numbers flowing from their pens in steady streams. This is where stars became data, where the universe was measured one calculation at a time. Fact 1. The original meaning. The term computer originally referred to a person, not a machine. This simple fact reminds us how profoundly our language has shifted. When we say computer today, we envision electronic devices, screens and keyboards, processors and memory. But for much of history, a computer was someone who computed a human being who performed calculations as their occupation. Observatories and laboratories employed computers for routine numerical calculation long before the word was ever applied to electronic devices in the 20th century. These were specialists in arithmetic, people who could add, subtract, multiply, and divide with accuracy and speed, who understood trigonometry and logarithms, who could work through long chains of calculations without losing track or making errors. The role existed because science generates enormous quantities of data that must be processed before it becomes useful knowledge. Observations mean nothing until they've been corrected, standardized, compared, and organized. Someone had to do this work, and in the 19th century, that someone was invariably a human being sitting at a desk with paper, pen, and perhaps some tables of logarithms or trigonometric functions. The human computer was part of the scientific apparatus as surely as the telescope or the measuring instrument. The observatory couldn't function without them. They were the bridge between raw observation and finished knowledge. The processors who turned celestial measurements into the catalogs and tables that astronomers consulted and built upon. When We use the word computer today for our electronic devices. We're continuing a linguistic tradition that began with these human calculators. The machines inherited the name of the people whose work they eventually replaced, a kind of memorial embedded in our everyday vocabulary. Fact 2. The observatories need at places like the Harvard College Observatory, astronomical computers were hired specifically to process observational data, the positions, brightnesses, and spectra of stars, turning raw measurements into usable tables and catalogs. This was essential work for advancing astronomical knowledge. Think about what astronomers needed: accurate positions of stars so they could track celestial motion, measure distances, and understand the structure of our galaxy. Measurements of stellar brightness that could reveal variable stars, identify different types of objects, and map the distribution of matter in space. Spectral data that could tell them what stars were made of, how hot they were, whether they were moving toward or away from Earth. But telescopes and instruments produced only raw data, numbers written in observation logs, marks on photographic plates, scale readings from measuring devices. This raw data required extensive processing before it became scientifically useful. Each measurement needed corrections for instrument imperfections, for atmospheric effects, for the Earth's motion through space. Values needed to be standardized, converted to consistent units, organized systematically. The human computers performed this transformation. They took the observer's raw numbers and through careful calculation, produced the refined, corrected, standardized values that went into published catalogs. These catalogs became reference works used by astronomers worldwide, foundations for further research and discovery. Without the computers, the observational work would have been largely wasted. You could point the finest telescope at the heavens, record the most precise measurements possible, but if no one processed that data into usable form, it remained merely ink on paper or marks on glass. The computers gave meaning to observation, transformed seeing into knowing. Fact 3. Building the system. In the late 19th century, the Harvard Observatory director Edward C. Pickering built a large staff of human computers, eventually numbering more than 80 people, to handle the flood of photographic plates produced by new telescopes. This was data processing on an industrial scale, organized with the same principles of efficiency and division of labor that characterized factories of the era. Pickering recognized that astronomical photography was generating data faster than traditional methods could process it. A single photographic plate might capture images of thousands of stars simultaneously, each requiring measurement and analysis. The new technology created a bottleneck. Observers could gather data much faster than individuals could analyze it. His solution was to build a production line of human computers, each specializing in particular tasks, working together to process plates efficiently. Some would measure positions, others would measure brightnesses, still others would classify spectra. The work would flow from station to station, with checks and balances to catch errors, until completed catalogs emerged at the end. This required organization and management. Pickering had to hire and train his computers, develop standardized procedures, create systems for tracking work through the various stages of processing, ensure quality control. He built what was essentially a data processing factory, though the product was knowledge rather than physical goods. The scale of the operation was remarkable. 80 people working on astronomical calculation represented a massive investment in processing power. The combined computational capacity of 80 human brains applied systematically to a single purpose. It was the 19th century equivalent of building a supercomputer, and it enabled astronomical research that would have been impossible otherwise. Fact 4. Women's work. Many of these computers were women hired at relatively low wages compared with male professional astronomers. The job became a gendered, semi-clerical route into scientific work at a time when women were largely excluded from formal faculty positions or recognition as professional scientists. This created a complex situation. On one hand, computing positions gave women access to scientific work and to the inner workings of astronomical research in an era when most scientific institutions were closed to them. Women who became computers could contribute to real science, could see their names in published catalogs, could be part of discoveries even if they rarely received full credit. On the other hand, the gendering of these positions reflected and reinforced assumptions about women's capabilities and proper roles. Computing was seen as requiring patience, attention to detail, and willingness to perform repetitive tasks, qualities stereotypically associated with women. It was clerical work elevated slightly by its scientific context, but still subordinate, still supporting rather than leading. The wages reflected this status. Women computers earned a fraction of what male astronomers made, even when doing highly skilled technical work. The justification, when any was offered, usually invoked women's presumed lack of family, financial responsibilities, or their natural suitability for detailed but uncreative work. These rationalizations obscured the reality. Talented women were being systematically underpaid for valuable scientific labor. Yet within these constraints, many women computers found meaningful work and made significant contributions. They brought intelligence and dedication to their tasks, found satisfaction in precision and accuracy, took pride in contributing to human knowledge of the universe. The limitations imposed on them make their achievements all the more remarkable. Fact 5. The daily work. Astronomical computers inspected glass photographic plates and measured each star's position and brightness, then reduced those measurements by hand correcting for parallax, atmospheric refraction, and instrument error to produce accurate, standardized values for catalogs. Picture the work itself. You sit at a desk with a glass photographic plate before you, perhaps 8 by 10 inches, covered with tiny black dots representing stars captured by the telescope. Some dots are darker, some fainter, some barely visible. Your job is to measure them systematically. You place the plate on a measuring engine, a precision instrument with scales and crosshairs that allows you to determine exact positions. You move the plate carefully, centering each star under this crosshairs, reading off the coordinate values, recording them in your notebook. Hours pass as you work through the plate, star by star, hundreds or thousands of measurements. But recording the raw measurements is only the beginning. Each value must be corrected for multiple sources of error. Parallax, the apparent shift in position due to Earth's orbital motion, must be calculated and removed. Atmospheric refraction bends light passing through the air, shifting apparent. Positions in ways that depend on the star's position in the sky and the atmospheric conditions during observation. The telescope itself has imperfections, systematic errors that must be accounted for. You work through these corrections using tables, performing arithmetic, making adjustments. The calculations are straightforward in principle, but demanding in practice. You must maintain concentration, avoid errors, keep track of multiple steps. A single mistake can corrupt the final value, potentially misleading future researchers who consult the catalog you're helping to create. The work requires a particular kind of mental discipline, the ability to maintain accuracy, to stay focused on detail for hours, to care about correctness even when the individual numbers seem insignificant in isolation. Fact 6. The technical demands. The daily work of human computers involved repetitive but technically demanding operations. Reading scale values from measuring machines, performing long series of additions, subtractions, trigonometric calculations, and interpolations, and checking each other's arithmetic to minimize errors. The repetitiveness could be numbing. The same types of calculations over and over, plate after plate, day after day. Add these numbers, subtract those, look up this logarithm, interpolate that value. The rhythm became automatic, your hands moving almost without conscious direction. But you couldn't allow your mind to drift completely, or errors would creep in. The technical demands were real, despite the routine nature of the work. Trigonometric calculations required understanding of angles, sines, cosines, and their relationships. Interpolation between tabulated values required judgment and care. The corrections for various sources of error required understanding what you were correcting for, not just mechanically following steps. And always there was the need for accuracy. Science depends on reliable data. A catalog with errors is worse than no catalog at all, because it misleads rather than informs. The human computers bore responsibility for ensuring that their calculations were correct, that the numbers they produced could be trusted. Systems of checking helped maintain quality. Computers would verify each other's work, performing calculations independently and comparing results. Discrepancies would be investigated and resolved. This collaborative checking created redundancy, caught errors before they could propagate into published works. The combination of repetition and demand created a particular kind of work experience, simultaneously monotonous and engaging, routine, yet requiring constant attention. It was work that could exhaust you mentally, even though you sat still all day. That could leave you drained from the sustained concentration required to maintain accuracy through thousands of calculations. Fact 7. The Henry Draper Catalog. The SIA Henry Draper Catalog, one of the first major spectral catalogs of stars, depended heavily on human computers who classified stellar spectra and assigned spectral types long before any automated digital image analysis existed. This catalog became a fundamental reference work in astronomy, and it was built entirely on human computation and judgment. Stellar spectra, the rainbow-like patterns of light produced when starlight is dispersed through a prism or grating, contain enormous information about stars' temperatures, compositions, and motions. But this information must be extracted through careful analysis. Each spectrum must be examined, its patterns compared to standard types, its features cataloged. The human computers at Harvard looked at spectrum after spectrum, recorded on photographic plates, and assigned each to a classification type. This required training and judgment. They had to recognize subtle differences in spectral lines, understand the significance of various features, apply classification criteria consistently across thousands of stars. Annie Jump Cannon, who began as a computer, eventually classified the spectra of hundreds of thousands of stars, developing and refining the classification system that became standard in astronomy. Her work was simultaneously routine, examining spectrum after spectrum, assigning types, and intellectually demanding, requiring her to make fine distinctions and maintain consistency across an enormous dataset. The catalog that resulted from this work became indispensable to astronomers. When researchers wanted to know a star's spectral type, they consulted the Henry Draper Catalog. The information it contained enabled countless studies, contributed to understanding of stellar evolution, helped map the properties of our galaxy. And it was all built on the patient, careful work of human computers, examining glass plates one star at a time. Fact 8. From computers to scientists. Individual computers, such as Williamina Fleming, Annie Jump Cannon, and Henrietta Swan Leavitt, began as calculators of other people's data, but ended up producing fundamental results like systems of stellar classification and the period luminosity relation for variable stars, built directly on this painstaking manual computation. This progression reveals something important about scientific work. The boundary between data processing and original research can be permeable. These women are hired to compute, to process observations made by others, to turn raw data into catalogs. But through their deep engagement with the data, Through countless hours examining stellar images and spectra, they developed insights. That led to major discoveries. Henrietta Swan Leavitt, measuring the brightness of variable stars night after night, noticed a pattern. For certain types of variables, the period of brightness variation correlated with the star's average brightness. This relationship, once established, became a cosmic yardstick, allowing astronomers to measure distances across enormous reaches of space. It was one of the most important discoveries in early 20th century astronomy, and it emerged from work that was officially classified as mere computation. Fleming and Cannon, classifying spectra, developed the classification systems themselves, imposed order on the diversity of stellar types, created the organizational frameworks that other astronomers would use for decades. They weren't just applying someone else's system, but creating the systems through their work. Yet, these women often struggled for recognition. Their discoveries were sometimes attributed to male supervisors or published without proper credit. They remained computers in title and salary even when doing original research. The institutional structures that employed them couldn't quite accommodate women as full scientific colleagues, even when the quality of their work made such recognition clearly deserved. Their stories remind us that important scientific work has often been done by people officially occupying subordinate positions, and that genius can emerge from repetitive labor when the laborer brings intelligence and dedication to their task. Fact 9. The division of labor. The job was designed around a world without mechanical or electronic calculating machines. Observatory divided labor, so observers collected data at night and human computers processed it by day, a structure that became unnecessary once machines could do arithmetic faster and more cheaply. This division made sense in its time. Observers needed to work at night when stars were visible, and the physical demands of operating telescopes in cold, dark conditions were exhausting. Computers worked during daylight hours in comfortable rooms, processing the previous night's observations. The system maximized the use of both telescopes and human labor, keeping both working productively around the clock. The separation also reflected skill specialization. Observing required different abilities than computing: keen eyesight, familiarity with telescope operation, knowledge of the night sky. Computing required arithmetic skill, patience for detail, systematic thinking. By dividing these functions, observatories could employ people suited to each task. But this elegant division depended entirely on the absence of alternatives. Once mechanical calculators became available, and later, once electronic computers arrived, the rationale for employing dozens of human computers evaporated. A machine could perform calculations faster, more accurately, and without salary or rest. The economics shifted decisively against human computation. The transition wasn't immediate, and it wasn't painless for those whose jobs disappeared, but it was inexorable. The same technological progress that made astronomical photography possible eventually made human computers obsolete, replacing them with machines that inherited their name. Fact 10. The vanishing dot. By the mid-1900s, observatories had largely phased out dedicated computer positions, absorbing mathematical work into the duties of scientists and engineers who now used mechanical calculators and later digital computers. The title, human computer, survives mainly as a historical label for a vanished occupation. The transformation happened over decades. First, mechanical calculators, desktop devices that could perform arithmetic at the turn of a crank, reduced the need for some human computers and made the remaining ones more productive. Then electronic calculators and early digital computers eliminated entire categories of computational work. Finally, as computers became more powerful and sophisticated, the last vestiges of human calculation disappeared from scientific practice. The women and men who had been computers adapted as they could. Some transitioned to operating the new calculating machines. Their understanding of computation making them valuable as the technology changed. Some moved into other roles within their institutions or left science entirely. The younger generation simply never entered the profession, pursuing different paths as the job opportunities dried up. Today, when we visit observatories or look at astronomical catalogs, we rarely think about the human labor they went into creating them. The Henry Draper Catalog, still referenced by astronomers, contains the work of countless hours of human computation, but we consult it as a finished product, data divorced from the hands and minds that produced it. Human computers left behind an impressive legacy, the fundamental catalogs of stellar positions and properties, the classification systems still in use, the discoveries that emerged from their painstaking work. They mapped the universe one calculation at a time, transformed observations into knowledge through pure human mental effort. Their occupation is gone, made obsolete by machines that compute faster and more accurately than any human could. But their contributions remain, built into the foundation of modern astronomy, acknowledged by those who know the history, remembered in the stories we tell about how scientific knowledge is created and who creates it.